Okay, excellent. Thank you very much, Rob. We are going to call the September 2nd, 2021 Vermont Community Broadband Board meeting to order. It is 9:03. Okay, first item on the agenda is agenda changes and request to approve agenda. One item I would like to add to the agenda is just a placeholder for executive session in the event we need one. So at the top of the agenda, we'll have a placeholder added. And I'd also like to add, after we approve the agenda, one item for administrative details to review, just some administrative stuff and paperwork. Anybody else have any changes to the agenda?
Did you want to take out the item at 9:50 about the policies? Or postpone it till next meeting?
Yes, please. We'll address, let's leave it for there to address for now, but not take action on it at this board meeting. Thank you for calling that out.
Yeah, I think that's, I think that when we do policy discussions, thank you for writing that. You know, I'm not, I can't do as good a job as you did of writing those up. So, so the point, what Rob and I talked about is we'd like to discuss it and then at the next meeting, ratify them so that it gives the CUDs a chance to get feedback.
Perfect. We'll get there. We'll take that up. Okay, any other comments on the agenda or changes? Motion to approve.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, agenda is approved. First item that we're going to take up is some administrative details for the board. You will see there were some pieces of paper at the end of the table. I'm going to turn this over to Christine to address.
Yeah, so I'm guessing many of you filled out W-9 forms, but they're pretty straightforward. I sent you, I didn't include the instructions. The form is here, the paper form, but I did send you an email, the W-9 with the instructions. And the state uses this personal expense form for reimbursement. So that's what will be required to submit to the state. And the reimbursement rate for mileage is 56 cents per mile.
Is that the standard IRS?
Yeah, standard IRS.
Okay.
Yep, so you can Google that. But you're now owed for 4 days, 4 meetings. A meeting, you know, if you attend, a meeting is a day. So, you know, put in the date, just put in VCBB, you know, Vermont Community Broadband Board meeting, and the reimbursement rate is $250. Put in your mileage, 56 cents a mile.
So one question that has come up is, in the event we are spending time in addition to board meetings on VCBB work, should that be reimbursable? And,
yes.
And in my experience, in terms of other organizations I've worked at, if it is authorized, then it is reimbursable. So if I choose every day to spend on VCBB work, I'm going to stress test this. If I decided Monday I'm going to read something and I put in for it, Tuesday I read something and put in for it, is that appropriate? So I'd like to have some discussion about that.
I'd like to comment on that.
Absolutely. Right.
So we each bring some professional expertise to this board, and this is a working board. So I think what we would be lucky to have is working board members, and that probably at a rate of $250 a day, we would be getting extreme value from these working board members. So it's not that any of us is going to make a lot of money doing this. If there was a concern about abuse, I would assume the chair would talk about it with the individual. And if there was a charge and it didn't seem like there was value, then I think that's important. But for example, just take the RFP. I spent an afternoon going through the RFP and looking through it carefully and documenting different things, correlating it with the statute back and forth. So if I charged you for the daily equivalent of an hour, so taking 250 and dividing it by 8, I think that would be a great benefit to this board. Not to parse. I think we're contributing a lot of value for the reimbursement, and I would hope that we would encourage people to work, not discourage people to work.
I would add, when I say it's authorized, the Act 71 does authorize us to be able to pay. Have I got that correct, Jim?
Yeah, I can verify that you do.
Yeah,
Um,
okay.
Just as a note, Laura is listening. She's
Okay.
still on her way.
Okay.
I mean, a lot of us may choose not to bill that time. That's fine.
Agreed.
But I think if you're feeling like you're putting in an afternoon and you really ought to be compensated, then I think you should have the ability to do that.
I'd like to make a proposal that all expense claims are reviewed by the chair. And I will lean on the side of payment versus non-payment because there's so much startup work. I just want to keep check of it because I want to make sure that it's not, so it doesn't get out of hand. So I would like to put a proposal on that there's a check and balance on this, that we submit the forms, but the chair reviews them rather than Christine review them as the executive director. I think the chair should.
I think that's appropriate.
And I'm going to lean on the side of yes, unless it gets out of hand. So if I'm going to use myself as an example, if if I'm spending, very little time putting in 250, I would check myself and say, it's just have some inquiry around that. So just to put some checks and balances, that's my proposal.
Lean on the side of appropriate, don't lean on the side of yes. Like default shouldn't be yes, default should be appropriate.
Right,
you.
right.
But that's better said.
Yeah.
Totally
How do
agree.
who do you want to have review yours, just so that it's
I'm sorry.
balanced?
Who will
So as
review
you
you?
put your expenses in, so that you have that.
I'll have the vice chair.
Yeah, actually,
Good
I-
idea.
Me.
Act 71 has me authorizing the expenses, but I do feel uncomfortable in that position.
Exactly. So to take you out of an awkward position.
So when you give me the yes, or you give me yes.
And you're still probably going to authorize them for payment purposes, right?
That's right, yeah.
Okay, so as we submit these, submit them to Christine. Christine will send a batch to me, however she can figure out how to do that. So that way it's only one point of contact we all send. You send a batch to me, I'll authorize, and if I have one, I'll send to Dan. Beautiful. Okay. Is there anything else under administrative items?
No, that's it.
So we have to fill out the tax form. These will be our expense forms. Okay, next item on the agenda, June Tierney. Welcome. Thank you very much.
Pleasure to be here.
Do you want to kick this off?
Sure. I think, with this update on pre-construction funds was prior to the fact that they were approved and transacted, but maybe you can give an update on what the process is following that and what the process is for getting the construction funds approved. And that really gets to the second bullet, how do we get the process of board approval? And then the third bullet is really specifically about the grant administrator that will work and what you perceive their job responsibilities are. We got clarification on the staff pay for staff attorney. Carol gave me that at 3 p.m. That was good. I was providing you with the wrong information. You have that in your packet. The actual starting pay can be as high as 94,300 something. I sent you that at the last moment. That's right here. If you don't have the state attorney pay plan, it's right down there on the table. And then, of course, take questions.
Okay, by all means, you'll forgive me, I don't have the agenda right in front of me. If there's a copy of it, maybe?
Yeah.
I have it. Thank you so much. So I'll try to follow along with these bullets then. Can you hear me okay, by the way? Thank you,
I want to
Brian.
make sure no one is downstairs, just because how it works there. If you wouldn't mind just doing the slide for a minute. Is that
Okay.
okay?
How do I click forward?
I'm sorry.
Just
Okay. Okay, well, I will run then.
don't run.
I
We're
just want to
fine.
be sure.
So let me just begin by saying I'm just delighted to be here. And I thank all of you for your service. I listened to your discussion about your time that you're putting in, and you're right, this is a startup process, a pre-formation process, as we call it in the law, except you're already performed. And that necessarily means that there's a significant time investment right now. The more that you do that upfront, the better it will serve you on the back end. And I've known so many of you for so many years, and I'm well aware of your work ethic and the excellence of your work. So I have full confidence that you're going to get this on steady flow before long. And there is much to do, and I just want you to understand that the department is here to support you in any way we can to make this as smooth a stand-up process as possible. So for instance, on your W-9 forms and the like, if they do prove unfamiliar to you, really please feel free to reach out, if not to Rob and Christine, then to Carol Flint and her admin division. Before long, you will have your admin person, and then that will be a wonderful home for that sort of inquiry, and that person will be able to support you. Right now, you're doing all this work with no staff support except for Rob, and so, of course, you're doing probably things that you won't be doing in due course. So just have faith, and thank you again for your service.
And let me just add here, I am very satisfied with the support I've received from the department. You've been excellent. Your staff is excellent.
I would agree with you, and I thank you for that, and I will pass that on to them. I share your high regard of my staff. They really are just committed to public service and realizing the public good. And yeah, I've never known them to not be willing to help, not willing to chase down something and the like, if that'll help you do your jobs better. So with that, there's one more thing I should say too. I think we have to understand that to some extent we're inventing something kind of new here, and so there are hiccups, there are bumps, whatever. And I think that the guiding star here has to be good faith. Everybody is working in good faith to try to get this done and done well. So please don't be discouraged if you hit a speed bump or you hit something that feels awkward. We can work through it, and we're going to do okay because we're all directed at achieving the public good. So with that, you had asked about a status update on the pre-construction grants, and as you see on the slide up here, we have a significant number, all of which are now approved and executed. And a lot of this represents the hard work that Rob did before the board was stood up on August 6th and now continues under your auspices. You can see that this represents an allocation of $1.2 million that have been appropriated pursuant to H315. Frankly, all of that was in the works before your board was officially created by law. At the time when those grants were issued, there was a known need for more funding for more activities. And that is what I understand you will be appropriating some part of the $30 million that were recently green-lighted by the governor for expenditure on pre-construction grants. So my understanding further is that within this grant community in the awardee column, there are folks who at different times may have held back on some of their requests, and as I understand it, there may even be one CUD that has not yet made a pre-construction grant request. That would be EC Fiber, because they understood that more money was coming, and so they tried to prioritize what absolutely needed to be funded in the short term, and that's what these grants represent. To my knowledge, as of this morning, these entities should have received 50% of these grants already. I am working on verifying that. Rob, I don't know if you have better information, but that's what I understand as of this morning.
There's a few that are still in the invoicing process, but they just submit their invoices. But the department has issued checks or direct deposits for everybody else. One thing to note on this sheet is there's double entries. I'm not sure why, but like for instance, NEK Community Broadband did not receive. Let me check on that. I'm just trying to understand the spreadsheet, that's all.
Yeah, well, I will not pretend to have greater knowledge about this, but I'm happy to chase down any details that may seem, noteworthy to you that warrant some clarification. But this, in a nutshell, is where we are as to this what I'm going to call initial H315 round of pre-construction grants. What this board will be charged with, or is charged with, is now supervising the process of soliciting, reviewing, and deciding whether to fund requests for pre-construction grants that are made for the $30 million. that is now available to you through my accounting system to do this work. And that is where we're going to spend some time talking about process. It seems to me that, how do I put this? I think we're putting a premium on efficiency, we meaning the state, and I would hope that this board would as well. And so for that reason, I would encourage you to think of the finance and accounting processes that the state has, the granting procedures that the state has. I would encourage you to think of those things as ready-made or prefab, if you will. You could spend your time inventing some that are particular to your board if you choose, but I don't recommend it for what it's worth, because I think your expertise and time are better spent on poles and fiber and the like. But what that means is that there is this sort of interplay between your board and my agency and how we report up the food chain to finance and management, the agency of administration, and ultimately to the governor. And the way I would suggest you think of it is you are embedded with the department, and we are here to give you, essential life support systems and access to those things. Your decision making substantively is entirely independent. That is nothing that I reach into as commissioner or that the administration reaches into in any way. Where there is, some contact, and that may feel initially to you like a rub, but I don't think you need to think of it that way, is that the administration, and through specifically the governor, down through the agency of administration, secretary of administration, down through finance and management, Commissioner Gresham, to me, the commissioner who is supposed to administer this fund under the statute, there is accountability for how this money gets used. And I don't mean substantive decision making, but rather who got the money, how much money did they get, what did they spend it on, and were those purposes permitted under state and federal regulations pertaining to this grant funding. That's the part that is inescapable for all of us, including you, notwithstanding your independence. So my job in administering the fund, if you will, is to make sure that you're on those rails so that your work can proceed apace and it can be entirely defensible should there be an audit from the state or federal government. So that's my pitch in a nutshell. What we have done at the department, since we have a long tradition of administering federal grant funding, is we have prepared a grant plan over the years, and we've most recently updated it on July 1st, 2021. My understanding is that this plan has been shared with Christine and Rob. I don't know whether they have shared it with you as board members, but you might consider taking a look at it. It's about, 23 pages. It's not very dense, but it lays out very systematically what some of the criteria are, what some of the controls are, and things that we will be looking for as we review the papers that come from you as you make decisions to award grants. And again, all of that is in the service of ensuring that you are able to withstand state and federal audits with minimal risk.
Can I ask you a question?
Please
about that?
do, yes.
Yeah, just so that I have clarity on that. So I think that you're talking about the grant process and standards for grant administration, which is great, but the document that you just referenced for grant plans is not reflective of Act 71.
That is correct. It's not tailored to it in any, it's not, and it shouldn't be, frankly, because in that sense, Act 71 should be pouring over into the standard state grant process and controls, and that's actually your best proof that telling you that you need to adhere to this is not an intrusion on your decisional authority. So it's absolutely, I appreciate that very much. I am not going to go over this document in detail here. Instead, I'm just going to encourage you to review it. But just so you know, the department is required by the finance and management folks to have such a plan. So that's why we have it. We're feeding it to you as an off-the-shelf product and saying, do this, guys, because this is how we're looking at your work anyway.
Christine, can you make a note to have that circulated to us? The
Oh, yeah.
PDF or a link? Perfect. Thank you. That way we can read it. Go through
I've
it.
got that.
Thank you. So one of the things that I would encourage you strongly to do at this point in the startup phase is to convene a training, and I believe this has been discussed with Christine and Rob, to make sure that the CEDs have federal grants management training and organizational development training so that they are able to adopt the necessary policies and procedures to support what are called single audits. And I'm going to go over single audits in a moment here. I know that sounds like a lot, but truthfully, so many of the people who serve on these boards in one way or another in their backgrounds have done work like this elsewhere in their professional lives. And so it's not going to come as news to them that there's a need to be trained up a little bit on how to be responsible stewards of federal money. On the organizational development training piece, if that has not already been done, keep in mind these CEDs are all still relatively new, so it's perfectly understandable, and they haven't had a lot of money to deal with to date, so it's again perfectly understandable that they may not yet have instituted internal controls for how they expend money and the like. I do not have personal knowledge of those details, so I am talking at the 10,000-foot level. So if the CEDs have such controls in place already, yay. If they don't, this is a good time to get them, and a training would be a good check-in point for that. So I would highly recommend that you get that going. And again, the department is happy to support you in that in any way we can.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Please do, yeah.
When you suggest that training, are you suggesting it for the board or the CUDs or both?
Well, that's, if you're asking my opinion, again, many of you have deep experience in organizational management. So I would encourage you to consider what you think your need for training is. But in my tradition, you train the trainer, and then the trainer trains the individuals. And so it might be worth your while to spend some time as a board, just sort of seeing what it is that you're asking the CEDs to be trained up on. Rob, I'm thinking that this might be something that the Pew charitable trust folks can help with. This is a topic that we discussed with them in our recent meeting about an action plan. I'm sure the board's aware that the Pew Trust has offered to provide educational and training support as a part of an ongoing national study. And Vermont was selected as one of those states to participate in this. And I've been accompanying Rob and Christine to the initial meetings because we started that work before your board came into being. But I'm handing it off because obviously I'm not the appropriate person to continue the work, but I will support Christine and Rob however they wish. So I'm thinking they might be able to help in putting together some kind of training module for this. So just briefly about the annual report, it will come as no surprise to you that grantees are required to provide annual reports and that there are standards that go with that. As you see on the slide, the 45-day standard is one that's administered by the Department of Finance and Management and State Government. This is not a today item, but it's a good reference point for you. The CEDs, I think, are likely to have different fiscal years, meaning their fiscal years begin and end on different dates. And so the salient point here is that there needs to be a vigilance that this reporting requirement is observed in a timely fashion. And to sort of introduce in parallel a different conversation, we're talking later about the grant manager position. This is exactly the kind of thing that I would envision the grant manager keeping an eye on for you folks. And Rob's done a capable job as the rural broadband technical assistance specialist, but I think his portfolio is probably expanding, and it may make better use of his time for that grant manager position to do that instead. Just to tee this up for further conversation, what we're going to be talking about next is the grant guidelines and procedures that I've already begun to touch on. Rob, if we can go to the next slide. So this is an interesting point in time. This is the first screening that the state of Vermont does when ascertaining whether somebody's eligible for a grant. And this is where you folks are standing in the green box. At the outset, you're going to have CEDs applying to you for these pre-construction grants that use ARPA money. The flow chart is pretty self-explanatory. As you can see on the right, you've got green and red points, and those things turn on whether the requirements for annual reports and audits have been met or not. The interest, yes, please go ahead.
I'm just, so you're saying, I mean, it's a CD with a first-time application. They have no annual
Exactly.
report
That is
status yet.
exactly, you have
Okay.
beautifully segued into my next point.
All right,
This is,
thank you.
this is what makes it so interesting, and I'm using the word advisedly, because this is a flow chart that belongs in a universe where there's an ongoing relationship. So for instance, if we were talking just about EC Fiber, which already has a significant track record in receiving grants from the state for building infrastructure, this would be a perfect fit and we would move on. But we're not just talking about, EC Fiber, we're also talking about a lot of newly formed entities that have no track record. And as you're going to see in the next slide, there's a risk assessment that goes with that. It's a little complicated, but if we could just go back to the other slide first for just a moment. Thank you very much, Rob. The point here is, as Holly's pointed out, you're dealing with entities that do not have a prior record. So all of them are going to get these green boxes. They're going to hit them at the outset. But they are newly formed entities. And so there's a premium on ensuring that they've got some rudimentary mechanisms in place at the outset so that they're going to be able to meet these requirements as they go on. And that's why I'm recommending to you that you organize a training for them and make sure that they have basic internal controls that fit an organization that is handling valuable dollars. So if we could go to the next thing. So I've had this conversation with my staff more than once. This is a pretty standard risk assessment narrative that is at the bottom of our scorecard that we've devised in reviewing grants. Rob, I think this will be familiar to you from all of the grants that you administered. And as you can see, it neatly distinguishes between low, moderate, and high risk. And the question becomes, where exactly do you fit a CUD that has no prior track record? Because if you look at the low risk flag, for instance, the organization has complied with terms and conditions of prior grant awards, or no known financial management problems or financial instability. You know, that could be freely acknowledged about EC Fiber, for instance. But what do you do with the other ones who have no prior experience in the realm of grant administration? Shifting to the high risk category, history of unsatisfactory performance, financial management problems. Again, they haven't been in existence long enough, so how would you say? So by default, I would classify the CUDs as moderate risk, because the good news is they have no track record. The bad news is they have no track record. And that is where your expertise as board members really comes in as you review the proposals you get. And so the absence of a track record, I think, introduces some moderate risk. Again, that's why it's so important to have the training, and also why it's so important that the board members invest their expertise in reviewing the grant applications, as you have already discussed at the outset of this meeting. And quite frankly, I think this is why the legislature saw fit to award you a $250 per diem for your work, which is significantly higher than other boards that operate in conjunction with the state.
And June, if it is a moderate to higher risk, that's addressed in the grant agreement if a grant is awarded.
It can be that, correct.
And that is the approach that we took with the 315 funds, of why there was contract review and a lot of extra reporting and a lot of additional steps.
But is it also right that funding, we have some discretion to award funding to, more developing CUDs to help them buffer some of their infancy and their newness, to try to support them as they start to take off, right?
Yes, I think what you're putting your finger on, Brian, and I'm just please keep in mind, this is my opinion. This is not your decision. You necessarily have to. You're talking about necessary risks that you have to take, because you have to foster these entities, and that's what the pre-construction funding is for. It's a question of how to take those risks safely, or as safely as possible. But I just wanted to draw your attention to this paradigm here
No, this is good.
in order to help you understand that you really are charting uncharted territory here, but you have to cross the terrain. So, and that's why such special faith and confidence has been reposed in your judgment.
Thank you.
And it does, just for my colleagues here, it does sort of beg another policy that if CUD is at a certain stage of risk assessment, there might be conditions in grants that require them to take certain trainings, have certain officers identified, all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So we can make a little menu.
Yeah, and have, I mean, it goes back to, we talked earlier about having this concept of a maturity model, right? EC fiber would be on the high end of the maturity model. Some of the nascent 2Ds would be at the low end. And how do we structure the grants appropriately to give EC fiber the ability to fly while others need the ability to be supported? Right?
Yes, that's correct. And I think that some strengths that you have are the ability to interface with these entities closely, if you so choose,
Yeah.
in order to inform your judgment as to where they are in that model. And also you've got staff who are very deeply experienced in the subject matter and who are very closely acquainted with the individuals. And you also have Vicuda as a resource as well. So in other words, if it's terrain that seems foreign and it has to be traversed and you're not exactly sure of what awaits you there, you have an excellent complement of resources to start that walk and make those adjustments as appropriate. Because, the bottom line is, folks, the money is there to be used. And it's there to be used for a very specific purpose, which is to get this bill done. And I think it necessarily is understood that there's discretion that is going to have to be exercised as you traverse that terrain and achieve the mission. If we could go to the next slide, please. So, in a nutshell, a single audit is intended to be an efficient way for grantees. Oh, I see Laura has her hand up. Perhaps she has a
I
question.
can,
Laura, can you hear us?
hold on, I'm gonna have to unmute her. I believe you can unmute yourself. If not, I will do that. I'm just gonna spotlight Laura for a second, Laura, can you hear us?
Unmute right now.
Okay, why is it not letting me unmute?
Is she perhaps muted on her end?
She might be muted on her end. That's the challenge.
She
There
is.
we go. Hello, Laura. Not sure why she's not muted anymore.
Okay.
Okay, well.
Maybe you can throw it into the chat.
The chat's not active for a variety of reasons.
Should we text her and find out if she's trying to speak or not?
Sure. Oh, I just
You have her. I don't have
Oh,
her.
yeah,
Oh,
I
here
can-
we go. Might be her internet connection.
Are you there, Laura?
Connection.
I think she might be.
Oh, yeah.
We cannot hear you, Laura.
If you were to
We cannot hear you.
Text me.
if you were to text Christine with your comment, we would read it into the record.
Yes, I'm checking.
Okay.
Can you hear?
We can hear very little of you, Laura. It's very choppy.
Please.
Just keep going. Just keep going.
Okay.
We heard that.
Okay, let me figure out how to go back to the presentation.
She responded with keep going.
Actually, I'm trying to figure out if people are seeing the presentation at this moment, because it's still showing that I'm sharing. Folks out there, if you're still seeing the presentation, please give me a thumbs up. Okay, thumbs up, perfect. Thank you. Oh, and we're back at the beginning, sorry.
I think this is just so apropos that we have a participant in a car seeking Wi-Fi somewhere.
Exactly.
Why is this video on, Stephen? Okay, are we at guidelines?
Take
Or?
her off of Spotlight.
Oh, Laura's still on. Maybe that's what the challenge was. Hold on, let me spotlight. Apologize for any technical difficulties here. Okay,
Hi, can you all hear me while Rob is working on me?
Yes.
Yes, I'll leave you on spotlight then.
So I'm going to pull over because really briefly, I have a question for you all that I want Vicuta to hear and maybe for the commissioner around the single audits, which is something we know, as the commissioner was talking about, I believe that all of the CUDs will need, and that's no light undertaking. And also, my understanding is, especially with all of these dollars going out, that the providers of those services may be in high demand. So Rob or Christine, can anyone tell me if the CUDs are pursuing securing that kind of service for VCUDA or, collaboratively, which would be my strong recommendation? Are those discussions happening?
I know of at least two CUDs. There are likely more that are preparing RFPs to contract for the single audit. We've thought, Christine and I have both thought, as well as the CUDs, that might be something better centralized within the VCBB.
Yeah, I would strongly encourage the CUDs to think about that, given the level of funds out there. Thank you.
They're contracting for audit services, that's distinctly separate from like what June talked about earlier, which is like organizational development type training. I guess that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we have not had discussions.
Yeah, that's fine. I just wanted to know. I just wanted to clarify those two things as being distinctly separate. That's fine.
And there is an ongoing discussion about trying to centralize some of those other administrative services as well.
So just because I don't understand, I don't really know a single audit from a double audit. Is this something that is time sensitive? All the CUDs would have to be doing this at the same time, making it hard to aggregate those resources, or is this done based on the grant year, or what's the timing like?
Calendar year, or do we even know?
So some of those questions I can answer at the 10,000 foot level, and some of them I can't because they are intimately bound up with the individual organizations. What you can, I think, do effectively at the VCBB level is have a standardized approach to it so that can be easily replicated by all the CUDs. I won't go so far as to opine as to whether for administrative efficiency you want to try to get all the CUDs on the same fiscal year, but it's something that comes to mind. With that said, my understanding, and this is subject to check, I've spent many years tormenting all of you with subject to check comments in the hearing room, where if you testified a certain way, you better have said subject to check if you thought you were going to change your mind later. And as the hearing officer, I'd come after you and say, wait, your testimony was this. You didn't do a check, so your testimony is still this, right? So I'm turning that around on you now, and I'm saying subject to check. The CUDs that have received grants to date would not have triggered the $750,000 threshold that this makes this active. So the work that's being done in this area is prospective in anticipation that they're going to meet that threshold in due course, whether it's with their pre-construction grants or with the construction grants down the road. So this is something that will need to be stood up. And what the single audit contemplates is this. There's a myriad of agencies at the federal level, state level, that could have an interest in the work of a given grantee. In this case, probably fewer because this is such a specific subject matter, but nonetheless, finance and management, for instance, could be interested in the administration of the funds. The department could be interested, perhaps the E911 board. I'm just citing these things as an example. If those entities all acted independently to do some form of auditing, it could murder an entity. They could spend forever answering every single audit query. So the concept behind the single audit is here are the things that anybody who's minded to do auditing would care about, should be interested in, and those are the things that these entities, as a matter of course, would self-report on. And then what happens is the grant administrator, in this case, I think in chief, that's my agency, since I'm administering the fund, reviews those single audits or the individual audit for the CD to see that it was properly done and test the representations in it as appropriate. And if the single audit is performed correctly, the entity is responsible for identifying its own deficiencies, if you will. And that's that is a matter of course. What you can do is a spot audit, then to see whether the entity is appropriately performing the single audit. But this is exactly why you would want the CUDs to contract for services, as Laura is pointing out, because that's the bread and butter of those types of firms that do this kind of auditing, is they make sure that these controls are in place and that they're being followed or not. And if they're not, they write an audit report that says why not. So the single audit confines the universe in the first instance to the things that are essential, that need to be done, and that the grant administrator needs to have a window into whether they're being done properly or not. If they're not, then the grant administrator starts talking about remedial plans with the grantees. And then in the worst case scenario, if the grantee proves obstreperous and does not respond or is unable to, then you start talking about sanctioning the grantee, and that can be anything from withdrawing the funding to delaying the disbursement of it. But I want to make very clear that I am addressing myself to a population that has in no way, shape, or form given any indication that they are inclined to be deficient or to fall down on these responsibilities. This is just simply the universe that they're entering into, that you have entered into, and that I'm responsive to as well. And so, with good communication and good faith, I think we can get this done and get it done well.
So Commissioner Tierney, you
Yes.
have made grants that breach that $750,000 threshold. So surely there is a form or format of single audit. So could we access that so that we can see that as a model?
You very clearly were first in your class at some point in your life because you anticipate all of these salient issues, and the answer to that is yes, and it's coming later in my presentation.
Okay, that's great. And does that audit model solicit the input from interested agencies and the state auditor?
I don't know what you can make, Joe, but I'll be in.
Somebody's not muted.
Okay.
I don't know what you can make, but I'll come in when you're open.
Okay, you can come in.
I'm just referencing the fact that you mentioned certain agencies might have certain interests in understanding how to monitor the output of these CUDs. So the state auditor might feel the same way. Has that model that you all have developed asked for their input in developing a model of single audit?
So I can't answer that question. That's a little deeper into the weeds than I am, but let me say this. We have prepared a granting plan pursuant to the requirements of finance and management.
Yeah.
So the contingent answer is if finance and management has thought to do that, then yes.
Okay.
If not, then no. But the way I would encourage you to think of this is that the single audit is the gold standard requirement that all of the CUDs have to meet. And the eyes that are most readily trained on whether that has been met properly are my agencies. And I strongly suspect that there would be other events that have occurred elsewhere that would give you some indication or some warning that a separate agency is going to want to look at more than just a single audit. And I don't think that this document would lend itself to controlling for all of the core interests of or what interests that other agencies might view as core, but that finance and management is not necessarily distilled to be such. But this is certainly the start point, and I think it's pretty robust because a single audit review guideline requires that the report have information about the subrecipient's use of the federal funds, its internal controls, its compliance with program requirements. And those are the things that I think if you had that training I was talking about, you could be pretty sure then that the CUDs would be in a position to respond to. And I think probably, you correct me if I'm wrong, Rob, they speak to some of these issues in their response to the RFP when they make application for grant. Certainly is something that you could require in your request for proposal.
So June, just a time out for a quick second. Christine and Rob have talked about a workshop for the potential grantees. Is this on the agenda, the audit?
It's not, but it will be.
Let's put that on.
Yeah, it crossed my mind that maybe we should see if the statewide grant administrator would be willing to participate, since there are a lot of questions, and I'd rather it come from the horse's mouth, so to speak.
That's part of the education process.
Yes.
Through the workshop.
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you. Back to you, Commissioner Tierney.
Okay. And I hope others are watching the time, because I am not, and I don't want to take any more of your time than you want to allow it.
This is really important, so we are going to lean on the timeline for you.
Okay, very
To
good.
allow enough and sufficient so we can extract as much data and material as we can.
Real quick, just so I'm clear, I think you've said this, but the expectation is that neither the board nor the department is actively managing the audit responsibilities of the CUDs. The CUDs themselves will bear that responsibility. Is that accurate, or did I get that wrong?
I don't think you have it wrong, but let's drill down into that a little bit. The
Okay.
principal of responsibility rests with the CUD as the grant recipient to have the requisite controls and the like in place.
Yeah.
And they have the responsibility to ensure that they have performed a single audit. And that single audit then gets reported to my agency and to this board. And I will be looking at that. That is to say, the admin division will be looking at that and coming to me with problems. To make sure that the single audit is compliant.
Okay.
And I would have to think, Brian, that in that process, this board will be briefed on those audits as well. I imagine Christine and her staff will be looking at them.
Thank you.
But yeah, everybody has some responsibility here, but it's tiered. Okay. If there's one point that I could emphasize today for you when it comes to this risk assessment that you have to do in dealing with these entities, is that you'll have to balance the startup nature. And this is what you were pointing to, Brian, a moment ago. We have to foster the CUDs. We have to make sure they've got funding that allows them to become robust and functional entities. And I use that term advisedly because when I think of how far all of these entities have come in the last year, it's breathtaking and inspiring. So I do mean to doff my hat to the citizens who are doing this. But yes, there is, I imagine at times they look at an entity like EC Fiber and they must get a little tired of having EC Fiber waved at them, and at the same time, perhaps a little tired when they think of how much farther they have to go to get to that place. But they're going to get there, we're going to support them. Anyway, you have to balance that, that nurturing and willingness to underwrite some of the opening moves against the need to make sure that the money is well spent. And as we all know, it's great to verify money once it has been spent, but once the money is out of the account and someplace else, that's where the risk attaches that it can be spent in ways that perhaps prove to be not so judicious. And so that begs the question of how much money do you advance the CUDs as they do their work? And my understanding is that in past grant agreements, that has been 50%. Rob, is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Okay. And that may be something that this board wants to look at very carefully. And my guidance to you, for what it's worth, would be this. If you are assessing the cash flow needs, and I'm sure in your past lives you have dealt with this issue too, you can see that it's perfectly functional to disperse on an as-needed basis, as opposed to simply giving somebody 50% of something outright. For instance, if you were to set up disbursement processes for, I don't know, payroll every 2 weeks and the like, that may be preferable to a lump sum disbursement that is designed to cover 6 months of payroll. So I just encourage you to give some serious thought to this decision point about how much you're prepared to advance the CUDs, because once the money's out, it's out, and that's not in any way impugning anybody's integrity. It's simply a fact of life. And when the auditors come calling, it's awfully good to be able to say, we had a careful lead on this.
I hate to interrupt you with another question, but is that feasible administratively to be working in smaller chunks because the disbursement actually rests in your organization, or?
Fair enough. This is where the admin position that we've had in the discussion with you comes into play, and the grant administrator. And this is exactly why we went to joint fiscal and got that grant administrator position authorized. And this is why I begged for the admin position in the last legislative session, because I think with those assets, that becomes feasible. Mind you, the example I just gave you was exactly that. It was an example. I honestly don't know, sitting here, whether you want to be doling out payroll every week, every month, but it's just an example that I wanted to give you. I do think those resources ought to be able to help you have a process that you're comfortable with.
I know we're going to go off track a little bit, but I can give an example. At Washington Electric Co-op, we borrow funds from the federal government for construction work plan for our electric system. And we're not to the level of doling out at the payroll level, but we are allocated, we build lines, wires, poles, substations on our nickel first. We submit after we've constructed it to the federal government saying, we built to your standards, X, Y, and Z. It's very prescribed. We have a professional engineer sign a form. After it's reviewed at the federal government, we get reimbursed. That's a very granular level to protect funding, essentially. That's my experience through RUS in terms of how a co-op borrows from the federal government. I think that's stringent. But just as an example,
and it has in your revenue producing organization. So yeah,
that's a very granular level to protect the interest of the federal dollars, to make sure they're not spent inappropriately, and you have a PE signing off on some subset of the project. So if I spend $1 million, they'll check 10% of it and say, yep, checks all the boxes. It's been built to spec, built to your construction work plan. You get reimbursed. That's a process that's in place for the federal government level.
Yeah, I think what it's going to is, I would suggest that as we develop these grant agreements, we put these into consideration for the CUDs. Now, of course, the CUDs are going to need kind of the bridge. They're not an established organization with credit ratings, but I do think conceptually we can work through this in terms of what the grant agreement looks like and how we make those payments, because I think it actually goes all the way to the requirements of the design and construction organization. It's kind of a flow through, right? That I would expect that the CUDs, when they do their partnership agreements, they set expectations on how they're going to get paid in progress payments and say, you need to meet this criteria, verify, just as you said, you get a professional engineer that confirms, or in our case, it's confirmation around latency and connection speeds and those kind of things and losses. Those are out. Yeah, so I think that's.
We could set up some physical design standards in addition to, front loading some cash. We can be creative in how we do that.
Yep. We're thinking about it. Yep.
One of the things we heard from CUDs was that if they don't have enough money, they don't have enough runway to be able to kind of streamline of work. So that's for us to balance
Exactly
how that's going to flow. And maybe we start small in the beginning and build some trust, and then we can extend that runway.
There might be a difference between the pre-construction and the construction. The construction, there's going to be set points of you've achieved X, Y, and Z before additional funds are released, is how I view it. With some of the pre-construction, it's a matter of where it's signing one contract with a subcontractor in many cases. We have to find that balance.
I'm just going to take this opportunity to say a lot of this gets embedded in the contracts of various kinds. Why we need very experienced contract legal support. It's part of nurturing the CUDs, is to ensure that we've reviewed their contract portfolio or their contracts pertinent to the operation of the system, and that they'll meet these checks and balances as we go along.
It should be noted that within the 315 pre-construction funds, one priority we had was ensuring that the CUDs had the legal support, whether it was for negotiating agreements or negotiating contracts, because all these CUDs want to do their due diligence, as do we.
Yeah, and we also want to make sure they have their, one concern that I have is some of these CUDs don't even, they're, at least one CUD doesn't even have an employee yet, so you got to, our, first concern is, do we have the administrative staff at the CUD level to be able to comply with it?
That's what I think we need to come up. I'm going to go back to this 10 times, right? This maturity model, it's a very common concept in business practice, right? So you're going to have a level 1, 2, and 3, or something like that. And somebody who doesn't have an employee yet is going to be a level 1. And we're going to need to support them with certain things, and they're going to need to earn progress by the demonstration of tangible milestones that are going to be non-issues for the level 2 and level 3 entities, right? And I think if we get agreement around that here, it'll give us the right lens to look at any individual CUD, slot them into the appropriate level, and then help them move from the lower levels to the higher levels as they gain confidence.
We referred to that in the last meeting as a dashboard for all the CUDs.
Sure.
Is that
Sure.
right? So that we can publish it in a way that people can find themselves in that model.
Yep.
And it also neatly ties off actually with the risk assessment model.
That's perfect. It should align exactly. That's exactly right.
Over the next week, I can work to add additional fields to that model that was shared last week to include more of the capacity side of things, because that's one area that it's at the time I wasn't able to fill that in as accurate as I would like, so I didn't include that. But I think you're right. If they have employees, if they have support from the Regional Planning Commission, how their reporting has been so far, are all things that we can consider.
Yeah, I think it's worth us spending a little time on that model together, kind of parsing through what level 1, 2, and 3 are and how they build on one another, so that we all get that same baseline understanding and viewpoint. Because if that's going to tie into the risk mitigation models, how they rightly pointed out, that's going to streamline some of our discussions so we can move through this stuff.
Yeah, and I think it's something that can be updated probably monthly. I think
Sure.
Weekly might be you're
No,
not going to see much change.
I think monthly is more than enough.
Okay.
More than
Right.
enough.
Brian, one question for you on the maturity model concept, that in terms of doling out dollars and how we do that, you can have a mature company that if you lean on the side of giving them more money and more discretion, they can blow it and be
Sure.
inappropriate.
Oh, it's
So
not a
even
guarantee.
if they're on a maturity model of they've had really good past practice, I think that how we dole out the funds still has to have a lot of strings attached to it.
It may not govern one for one the controls you put in place in terms of how you distribute funds, but it should give you the context to start having that conversation. And let's be clear, right?
Yeah.
No model like this. It's like scoring candidates for a job interview. No scoring. The number at the bottom of the page is not going to decide who you hire. It's going to give you a process to have vibrant conversation that's going to lead you to who you're going to hire, regardless of whether they have the highest number at the bottom of the page or not, right? It's that process and the conversation around it that has value.
And I think if they're saying that the modeling that Brian's referring to is about the organization, the deliverables under a grant agreement are about the checklist of did you comply?
Yeah. I wouldn't have a distribution of funds based on how they rate on the maturity model.
No, it's one factor into that.
Okay.
It's not the factor into that. Yep, totally agree, Patty.
So one other model that we explored, and Christine had some conversations with the Northern Borders Regional Commission. For the commission, they contract with the local development districts. The recipients are required to contract with local development districts if they're not a state entity. That is something that we could explore for some of the newer CUDs of requiring that. We could issue a request for an RFQ, see with the qualifications that we'd want, and take away from the CUDs part of that responsibility so they can focus on their more value added, like building out their networks, working with their board, and ensure that we have a set amount of standards across the board for these funds as they go out is something that we've been chatting about.
Not quite sure what you mean.
Yeah, I didn't get that connection around. Can you explain that again, please?
So right now we have 9 CUDs around the state. We have one that is incredibly mature. We have other CUDs that are trying to figure out their bookkeeper, who is going to do their audit, who is going to deal with their procurement process. All of those more administrative tasks could be more centralized. And that's something that we can explore further. If the board wishes for us to do that, we could issue a RFI or RFQ to see what firms are out there, what services they offer, and have it as something that can be potentially even added as a grant condition to some of the grants for CUDs that are at a certain point in the maturity level, or have it for all the funds going out as additional accountability so all the reporting comes back the same.
So what we were talking about is, it's some of the, like, well, I'll say at least, the CUDs is using any kind of, the local economic regional planning commission, is that right? RPC?
Several of the CUDs are using the RPCs.
So using that for that type of bookkeeping and administration
Yes.
work? Okay, great. So that's one way to slice that, right?
Yeah,
Great.
it's just a form of delivery.
Right.
Yeah.
And do we know, like, is VCUDA do they aspire to provide any sort of central services, or are they just more aggregator of concepts and not really deliverer of services? I have no idea.
They just hired their first administrator.
Okay.
Well, we've asked them this question, we asked them.
Yeah,
Maybe it would be great to have the VCUDA administrator and the president of VCUDA come in and talk to us about aspirations for the
What do they-
organization.
what do they-
And just to introduce them, I personally don't know anything about them, so it'd be nice to have a little more context around what they do, how long they've been around.
We can ask the leadership team to come in, provide some diversity across the state as well. So we can do that for an upcoming meeting.
Sorry,
Shannon,
Commissioner.
we have totally got it all aside.
Not
Back
at
to
all.
you.
I am at your service, and I would also just underscore that I am happy to come anytime. I can be of help to this board. So please don't feel like I am here once and gone forever. Please just let me know when you need my help. Or would just like to hear from me and yell at me. That's good too.
I'll raise you, Jim.
There you go. There you go.
Just remember, subject to check.
Subject to check. I have naughty and nice lists for all of you. So I think what I want to do is very briefly hit on this grant administrator position before we go to the attorney position, and then I think I'm done, and unless you folks want to do more. But I hope by now it has sort of come into focus what this grant manager position could mean for the board. And yes, it will cost you money from your operational budget, but it is money well spent in my judgment. And I did hold off hiring for this position until you guys were up and running, because I really felt it was important for you to have a clear understanding of what I am trying to do here, and for you to shape that understanding as you see fit. Rob will tell you, as a veteran of his time at the department, that there were days when he probably wanted to shoot himself because there were grant administration tasks that needed to be done and that are important, and he had all this other relationship work, relationship building, resource locating work, conceptualizing work to do as well. And it was a lot for one position. The good news is that that position has transferred to you, as has the capable individual who occupies it, but that tension remains. And the purpose of a grant manager position that the department has in mind is to alleviate some of that tension, because I think the demands on your staff are going to be considerable. I also think it's important to have that interface with the department so that you're not off doing your own thing in grant administration land, and then it comes time to dock with the department and we discover that you've been doing very sensible things that are just very different from what is needed in order to have a seamless flow of checks and balances and information through the administration up to the governor.
as a veteran of the Vermont Telecom Authority, I can endorse this proposal.
Oh, I'm so pleased. to hear that. Okay.
Essential.
Okay. So,
Christine, do you have comment, you have thoughts on this?
Well, yeah, I think it's like any other business, right? It's the finances are the most, well, the most important of all the customer. But certainly the finances have to be the baseline for success. So you'll see in the proposal, we're talking about having a grant administrator here, but also having, somebody who can work with the CUDs and help them build their finance systems in place so that they can comply with these grant requirements. I mean, it starts with the grant requirements, right? In terms of, but that's like a baseline. That's a failure mode. We want to be well above that in terms of how we manage these finances.
Are we looking at one person? Are we looking at one person managing a contracting staff? I'd like to know more about the boots on the ground.
I think we're talking about two people here in terms of, and in the, I forget the term I used in the.
Yeah, one of the people is embedded within the public service department. One of them would be directly on our staff.
Yeah, I actually updated it here.
Those for grants, or are we mixing the attorney thing in this?
We're not talking about attorney right now.
Just understand.
Yeah,
Two people.
you've got an economic services administrator in here, directly reporting to the VCBB. And that job is kind of expands on what it takes in order to be financially sound.
Well, so is that different than a service that Vicuda or they would contract for directly? This is like an advisory to set up standards at the CUD level?
Yeah, actually, if you want to go to the description, it's actually right here in the packet. Economic services administrator.
Yeah, I got lost because the discussion from this document was not the same as the discussion.
Yeah, but this is evolving. So you can toss that away.
Yeah.
And move to the, this, unfortunately, we
Toss that meaning the table.
that table is
Okay.
now,
Okay.
we don't have any aversion to it. So it's
You
really,
don't need action on this yet, but it's still evolving. But the concept at this point is working through the department, the grant administrator position, but there may also be
there's an economic service administrator.
there's other staff that's going to come with this.
And the economic service, like I said, the grants become a baseline. That's the failure point. We want to build a robust finances at the CUD level. So we're performing at the highest level.
So the person that's with the VCBB would have more subject area expertise, could be involved in finding other funding. So some of the other grant applications, like I just read this morning, that the USDA Reconnect program will likely be opened again before the end of the year. So they're going to be involved in a variety of different aspects of the granting side of things.
That's different than the technical specialist that was funded by national, by the Northern Borders Regional Commission.
This is separate from the Northern Borders. The Northern Borders position would be focused more on how to leverage networks as they're built, how to prepare the pro forma.
Very technical.
Very technical.
I think Commissioner Jenkins' recommendation is really important because this is an area where we've experienced it with smart grid, and it's an area where you can go sideways and you can catch it before and lead to make sure that everything flows smoothly from there. I don't know if it's a full-time position. I don't have a sense for it. But I think to start, it ought to be, and make sure that we focus our energies there.
Well, how about if I read you a little bit of what we envision the grant manager doing, and you'll make a judgment about whether you think it's full time. I do. And
Grant manager and this economic services administrator, two separate things.
Correct.
And the grant manager you're talking about, June, is in the department.
correct.
Thank you.
And for what it is worth, as I listen to your conversation, the terminology that's coming to mind for me is grant manager at the department, grant liaison, grant management liaison at the VCBB. And that liaison has many other pieces to their portfolio that has nothing to do with grant administration, but being the liaison to the department is one of their functions. That's how I would conceptualize it. I also would just like to reiterate for your morale that you're here to build out broadband and put poles in the ground and string fiber and so forth. grant administration is taking on a disproportionate focus right now, but it's necessary because you're in the startup phase. But just realize that we will clear this area and you'll be on to your core mission. And the fastest way to do that, I think, is for us to get moving on getting this grant manager position up and running.
Jane,
Dan, please.
Would the grant manager be solely for our purposes, or would it be used for other grants outside the VCBB?
That is a good question, Patty. I don't know sitting here right now.
Okay.
I can say that it is possible. The department has other ARPA monies that it has to administer, and there might be some efficiency to be realized by having some of that done by this position. And then that begs the question of breaking out the expense and the like. The counterbalance to that, for what it is worth, I see Laura's hands up again. There are a lot of things that the department is doing in support of VCBB that are not ascribed to any one position, and that we're also not charging time for and the like. So it's a trade-off. I'm happy to have that conversation with you. Right now, the responsibilities for this position that I think are, at least right now, a full-time position would be what I'm about to tell you. Before I do that, though, I wonder if you want to check in with Laura.
Just real quickly, where in the department does this come up under the finance side of the department?
This would be in the admin division under Carol Flint's supervision.
Thank you.
Yes.
Patty, I am not clear on whether or not Christine and the commissioner are making the same recommendations to us. I'm getting a little bit lost in the number of positions that we're talking about. So I think that we have an admin at DPS, and now we are talking about a grant administrator. Plus, we have the job descriptions that were included in the board packet, the additional 3. So can I just get some clarification? Are we talking about those 5 positions kind of in a big picture way here?
Yeah, I would say we are talking about those 5 positions in a big picture way, because ultimately what we're saying, you're kind of going into the budget discussion, which is quite related. So in the budget, we have $100,000 budgeted for the grant administrator at the DPS, at the public service department. But we also have this economic services administrator within the VCBB. And the economic service administrator is looking at the whole financial controls and reporting mechanisms, right from contractors straight through to grants. The idea being the grant administrator is going to be specifically focused on grant requirements. We're going to focus on financial controls and financial reporting mechanisms as well. And there's a lot that most of that should be centralized. It should be simple. We should come up with simple reporting for the CUDs that meet the board's and our standards for ensuring that they're meeting those financial controls. I kind of look at these things like earthquakes. You can have a bunch of small earthquakes and you don't get much damage. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to be looking for weekly and monthly reporting to ensure that everything's running well, so that the single audit just becomes a secondary issue. Does that make sense?
I'm confused now, quite frankly.
Well, I'm saying the grant, you do a single audit just to make sure you're doing things right. We're doing that once a
Yeah,
year.
but let's pull it.
I want to put the department side stuff, the
Yes.
VCBB
You don't need to
stuff.
go into the weeds
Oh,
of exactly what
okay.
you're doing. Just
I don't have that.
keep it high level concept.
Yeah, we'll work with you on that.
Yeah, we get.
Yeah.
Grant manager, hold on, time out.
Sorry.
We've heard from the department, a grant manager housed at the department to keep us in check with all the department, state rules, grantee, how this money is dispersed and all the strings attached with it. Make sure that it's going out right and properly. And then on our staff, somebody to act as a liaison. I think it is the economic service administrator. I think.
You got it.
Okay. That's all. We don't need to go into the weeds of all the
All right.
stuff. Just
So-
let's keep it high level.
So, yeah, and I think if you don't mind, Madam Chair, we might express the consent of the board, of this board, to that configuration, because I have a feeling it's going to take a while to find that person.
Well, if it doesn't take a while, it certainly is competitive, and I'd rather get somebody before we are left with the dregs. Because there's a lot of ARPA money out there, and a lot of grants to be administered, and we're not the only ones in the market for a grant manager. So it would be enormously helpful if we could come to, that is to say, if this board could come to agreement and could tell me as a matter of official statement that you are amenable to my proceeding.
Are the VCBB board members comfortable taking action at this point?
Today?
Okay.
No.
Just on that one position,
On which, wait,
The grant
on the grant
Manager
administrator
under
at
the
at the
PSD.
department.
to get rolling and get that hired.
So taken away from someone, Christine.
Are you talking about hiring or? sending-
Authorizing the PSD to take
I have
action
to begin the hiring process.
to advertise, it gets the ball rolling.
Starts us staffing up.
Yeah, I-
Starts
clear.
them
Just
stepping
well
up to
managed.
Just
support.
with
it.
the
Well,
manager.
I do today, but next time we meet
Yeah.
positions, what's at the department, what's at the VCBB, how they interrelate, and then also who will they be conducting business with at the CUDs and other outside?
I agree. High level, not into, we don't need to go into the
Just
weeds.
high level.
But from everything the commissioners explained,
Yeah,
I think that we're
yeah.
talking about somebody who's within the department and not talking to the CUDs.
But we're,
frankly.
this is funded through us, correct?
It is.
I just want to be clear, this, we're committing some of our dollars to
That
this
grant
function.
administrator will be talking to the CUDs, but.
Well, I guess it's
At a different
Yeah, you
level.
got it.
well, so I'm kind of then lost about the
Yeah,
who
nobody has
we
the
have on
luxury
our
of not
staff.
talking to somebody, but that's what I do.
Yeah.
I may.
I could be cool with that.
All right, Laura? Are you okay with that?
Patty, at the risk of being tedious, can somebody just kind of walk me through just what, like how, so walk me through, CV Fiber is applying for funds, just very high level, like, where are the doorways that they're entering so that I understand where this person, what this position is?
Be able to
Not details, please, just super high level.
I think it probably would be best coming from me at this point because it can be a proof on your thinking as to whether this works for you. Can you hear me okay, Laura?
Commissioner, I think you need your parade voice.
Is the microphone here?
Yes, ma'am.
You're very muffled.
Okay, I'm very muffled, but I'm cute.
Come close.
So
Come close.
here we go. This is my friendly mask. Can you hear me now? Better?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, excellent. All right. So here's how I see it functioning. The board puts out a request for proposals to the CADs. DD Fiber responds. It has completed a checklist and the like that is embedded in your request for proposal. You review that proposal and you say, this looks pretty good to us. We're going to approve this $1 million they're asking for. It is time to execute. At which point Rob, I think, unless you have other staff, which may be this liaison we've been talking about, that person would contact grant administrator who sits in my admin division and says, Jane Doe, grant administrator, the VCBB has decided to grant $1 million to DD Fiber. Here is the paperwork for that decisional process. We need a grant. We need it to reflect this so that the board, the staff, whoever here at the VCBB can look at that, make sure that it reflects what you want. And we need to get this ball rolling.
So your personnel is actually drafting the contract?
Takes the first shot at it, if you will. Your council can do it. We can talk about what you want that, but that's what I
I just
have
want to be
envisioned.
clear. Yeah.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, these things are, I don't want to use the word cookie cutter, but you're not going to be inventing a new document for every grant.
Right.
So once you get the template down, this really should be self-executing. Anyway, so Jane Doe does that, works hand in hand with Rob or whoever your liaison is. If there are refinements that are needed, let's say DD Fiber has left something out or has left something unclear, I would expect that the VCBB's liaison would be the one to reach out to that CUD and to say, hey, we need this, that, or the other clarified. would then relay that back to my person, Jane Doe, who then would fold that into the grant, and that would be done. Then comes disbursement, which again, decision is made here at the VCBB level, execution then through the controls of the department. In that case, it's Patty LaRose, our checkbook and the like. Let's say for the sake of discussion that we saw in the process of looking at the grant that's being administered that funds are going to be spent on hot air balloons. You know, that's where the commissioner in administering the fund would probably say, yo, Christine, please, let's talk to your board. Why are we funding hot air balloons? Because it's so obviously not broadband. And then you come back to me and you say, well, this is experimental RTO technology. This is one way we're going to get wireless broadband to people until we can build fiber to them, whatever. And then I would say, okay, now I get it. And if you came back to me and said, this really is for pleasure cruises over Queechee Golf Course to see, you know, what it looks like, because we've always wanted to do that, that's where I might say, you know what, that's not going to pass muster. But that's an extreme example, just to make the point that I'm not going to represent to you today that I am, you know, a potted plant in this process, because the statute does say I'm supposed to administer the fund. But my understanding of administering is that I'm working through Jane Doe to make sure that you guys are able to focus on the substance of what you're supposed to be doing, and that you don't go off the rails with these granting conventions. Okay. So grant agreement has been achieved, it's been signed, money's been dispersed. It's time to see where the single audit is. And it's time to look at that single audit. Jane Doe is doing that. Jane Doe might see an issue in the single audit and might say, Rob, or liaison, or what's the deal here? Why did they not have an internal control? Two separate people looking at the checkbook. Pretty basic stuff. We're worried about embezzlement. They go back, find that out. They come back to us, and then Jane Doe says, okay, now I understand your explanation. I'm going to have to take that to the commissioner and see if she's comfortable with that, or does there need to be some sort of remedial plan? We would then work that out. If I came to the conclusion that there needs to be some kind of remedial plan, I'm not doing that in a vacuum. I'm talking to you folks about that. Because again, the interests here are all aligned, right? We want this done right, and we want the money well spent. So that's the interplay that I'm envisioning.
Yeah, I'm there. I'm there, Commissioner.
Patty, I have reporting from
Wait, hold on, Rob.
Sorry.
Laura, you're talking over Laura.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm Patty. I'm there in terms of this position. I do have one question, which is, how are we going to be able to approve requests prior to that position being hired, and what will happen?
If I could address that, I did give that some thought, Laura, and I think it's 2 to 4 weeks to get a grant going start to finish. Without that position, I think the path is through the Agency of Administration. You heard perhaps a moment ago from Rob that there is an individual who does statewide grant administration. And so I think in all likelihood, there would be a path through that person to get that done. Okay. But I am speculating. I don't think you guys are stopping your tracks, but frankly, I don't think it's advisable to go forward until you have this infrastructure laid down. There are things that you can do, though, in parallel to this hiring process, and that is you can get your RFP out. You can start. It's not like you have inexperienced staff. You've got an individual on staff who has been doing this kind of granting for over a year now, but you may need to improvise until you've got all of this infrastructure in place.
So, Patty, after we vote on whether or not to approve this, I would like to revisit the interim on this, unless you want to go there now.
Why don't we take action? Are we ready to take action? Is there a motion to approve the department hiring a grant manager position?
So moved.
Second, here in the room.
Brian's got a second. Yeah.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes.
Excellent.
Okay,
Thank you so
Laura,
much.
back to you for what do we do in the interim discussion?
So can we just talk for a moment about how do we, in the absence of having, an expedited grant grant development process,
how do we keep our CUDs moving? So in a way that is legal and manages our risk. So are we able to make tentative awards?
I think you're going to be able to develop the conditions of the grant. The things that the grant administrator is really going to focus on are standard state required, often by the Attorney General's office, standard state conditions, and ensuring that the grant conditions are stated in a way that they're actionable and enforceable. And so I think that we have a lot of work to do with the CUDs up front about reviewing what they're proposing to do, making sure that we feel it's in compliance with Act 71, going through whatever standards we feel we need to ensure are there. So there's a lot of work to do on that. And if we can sugar that off to a set of deliverables, essentially, that we're handing off to the grant administrator, that to me seems like work that we could get done.
And just a question.
Or that staff could get done.
Staff that get done, because like the process to now has been where it's I work with other staff and the attorneys to draft the grant agreement, and then I mostly work with Todd. Apologize not naming his position, who helps with all the administrative side of things, of processing, making sure it's entered into Vision, all of those types of things, executing the grant agreement, sending it out through DocuSign to get all the different signatures. Is that something that would still happen in this interim with the department?
Well, that's what I'm talking about, improvising. I think we have to improvise in some manner in that way. Hopefully we can keep that interim period as short as possible.
Yes.
But to Laura's point, if you're trying to keep the CUDs moving right now, I think the most important thing you can do is do this work that Holly just talked about, because we lose sight of this, but your own board has wheels that it's got to stand up before you can get the train rolling and bring the cuds along with you. So that's some of that work that Holly's identified that needs to get done. If I'm not mistaken, the CUDs, as I said at the top of the hour, have at this point, to my knowledge, gotten 50% of their H315 grants. So it's not the big shebang of pre-construction, but it's a start. So I think they are moving, Laura, if that helps you.
Yeah, I would piggyback on what Holly said too. I think we have a board. I look to the board's expertise for helping us define all of the things we're looking for in terms of the CUDs, in terms of consistency. Our initial focus has been on design, but we've identified a lot of other things. What are we looking for in terms of administrative facts? Like what are the levels you're talking about? You're making sure that they're staffed up to do that. So I think we have a significant amount of work to do. If we can get the RFP out, at the same time, we got to talk about what our acceptance criteria is.
And we also, the grant agreement, we have a base grant agreement that will likely need to be modified a little bit. This grant agreement was written with 360 in mind, but there's going to be other conditions to add in there or other changes. And we'd have to have that before any funds go out. So that is another step. So there's how we're going to approve, how we're going to score, then the grant agreement. And then it's really turned on over to you all for the more technical processing and getting that check out the door.
Oh, wait a minute. I think you've got the grant agreement on the wrong side of the line there. I heard that the grant administrator is doing the grant agreement. Is that?
Yeah, what we're talking about, this format, this template, I'm sure it gets reviewed through you for your layers on, and then it comes back to us for execution. That's correct.
And the CUDs in the meantime can be using an approximate form, knowing that they're going to review the final form later.
The grant agreement?
Yeah.
I guess it's a question of in this interim, since we're using a grant agreement for 315 that was approved by the department, right. If that with a few changes is enough to keep things moving in the interim. Ideally, we're going to have someone on staff within the next 4 to 6 weeks, but we also, these applications are coming in on a rolling basis.
Right.
So if things are going to start moving where we may need to make a decision on that existing grant agreement and modify from there. I don't believe we need to start from scratch, and I don't think this new person is going to start from scratch either. Like lawyers have different ways of drafting things up, but it's the same criteria.
Laura.
So if I may, to Rob and Christine and the commissioner, the processes that we are talking about right now, everyone feel confident that they will allow us to have new customers with service next summer.
Could you repeat that
Yeah.
question?
Is that a statement or?
So I want to make sure that we are thinking about supporting a process that allows for building next year. So what we're talking about, does anybody have concerns that these timelines that we're talking about, you have a better sense, Rob, probably, of, and Christine, of how many CUDs may be in negotiations right now? You know, are the processes that we're talking about still going to have the ability to result in us having new customers next year, having CUDs have new customers next year?
Could I ask,
That's on our
Laura,
agenda.
with great respect for the impetus and the passion that you are placing on service, and that being the benchmark of whether or not we're getting our job done.
Yeah.
Whether or not we're serving customers has a lot to do with the construction phase and the individuals along the whole line of the process. But I think your question is really, can this grant process be expedited, particularly hiring the person, such that we're supporting the pace at which the CUDs are working?
Yes, that is going to be every time. That is going to be my concern. Are we responsibly following right behind the CUDs and making sure that they're not stopping, because these are citizens that have come forward to volunteer to build this critical infrastructure for our state. And so I just want to make sure when we're talking about 4 to 6 weeks, and what does that actually mean to the CUDs? Are we going to have any CUDs that are going to freak out about that?
Likely, yes.
Why?
My
are they gonna freak
answer, because some of them, there was already, I don't have the exact number offhand, but there was at least $5 million in requests that we weren't able to honor. These were requests that were ready to go, that would allow them to move forward and be ready for construction next year. I don't believe there will be a delay.
That would have been awarded and authorized if you'd had the funds.
If we had access to the funds from finance and management and a few others. As long as the interim process continues as it has been continuing so far, and we don't make substantive changes to the grant agreements, I'd like to think we can still keep moving at the current pace. My concern is if it takes 6 weeks to hire somebody, how many weeks does it take for them to be up to speed to be able to take that on?
Right.
Interim
to get the
is
grant
gonna be
agreement
key.
out.
So lacking that, what's the alternative? Like, how do you, while we're hiring and bringing that person up to speed, what has to happen to keep the ball rolling? Is there a way to keep the ball rolling?
If we continue as we had been continuing, where I work on the grant agreement in conjunction with staff over there, I guess it's a question to you, Commissioner, of whether things can continue as they have in terms of getting funds out the door while we're waiting for this person to get up to speed.
Yeah, so I think they have to continue. I think what we're dealing with here is, before you guys stood up on August 6th, we were working our way through the H315 grants, and I was trying very hard to get them all done before Christine came on board, so there would be neat separation. I think we pretty much achieved that.
Yes.
And so what we're talking about is continuing whatever it is we did with the H315 process, except this time I'm not signing the grant agreements. That's now in your purview. And I frankly, sitting here right now, don't recall. I'm imagining, Christine, that you're signing as executive director. So that's really the only change we're talking about. And Brian, we're trying to minimize that interval as much as we possibly can, so that you can put this resource to other use. But to Laura's point, I have that time frame in mind. That is what I briefed the governor on last week in getting that money, at least the pre-construction grant money released to us, is that if we don't have this stuff out the door sometime in October, at the latest, I think I understood, the construction season for next year is in doubt for some folks, and we're mindful of that.
We
So
also
it's-
in the 315 process, we went through and made sure that the CUDs have their insurance, they have their W-9, they have their DUNS number, they have their SAM, all of these hoops that have to be jumped through every time. Those are all lined up, and that took a lot of time previously that will not take this time.
So it sounds to me like there's two things that are really on the table. Look at the 315 process and how is it augmented or modified by Act 71? Like, I don't know if that work has been done by anyone here yet. And so it's like, have we got the right grant? And then the second piece is a twofer from the commissioner. And that's, first of all, that you will direct your staff to continue to support the grant process. And the second part is that if we hire this person that the board just approved on your recommendation, that person won't be tasked to other process. It will be, that person's priority will be the work of the VCBB, just to say it out loud.
Oh, no, I can certainly make that commitment, no question. I think you can also see from what you just said why it makes sense for the VCBB to fund the position. And in my humble opinion, I think it would be helpful to not have to get hung up on exactly what that position is doing every single time, because as you see, we're expending enormous resources now that are frankly uncompensated. We pay our money to keep this going,
Well,
and that's okay.
And it really doesn't matter what the job description is. What matters is what the time frame is between application to award.
Yeah, no, I have no problem making that commitment.
I think the heavy lifting for the board to keep that timeline moving is to come to, an agreement as to what the selection criteria will be for those grants. The weighting and the selection, I think we have a lot of work to do in that area.
Well, we do need a differential between Act 71 and the 315 grants.
Well, when we drafted the grant, the process for 315, we were using 360 had just been passed at that point. So we were looking at 360 for a lot of the criteria. We've added additional criteria into the RFP to reflect that. But yeah, there is the review process that.
And just for our audience at home, 360 and Act 71 are the same thing.
Yes. Thank
So
you.
I've taken an action item, just to be clear with it. We're going to come back, Rob and I are going to take a close look at the H315 to make sure, and to identify what changes or additions need to be made to comply with Act 71.
Okay, very good. June, we're going to turn it back over to you.
And I'm going to try to move like lightning through this. It sounds like we can move to the discussion about attorneys. Forgive me for, before we go there though, a word on the admin. My advice to you would be to get moving on hiring the admin too.
I thought you were hiring the
I
admin.
technically am, but I've not done that. I've listened to your discussions and I've heard some concerns, the most memorable ones, I think, from Patty, about ensuring that we, hire somebody who can be, what was your term? Can grow in the position or can do more than just strictly.
Right. I anticipate the admin is going to be more than just pushing papers. It will be
This is what I mean.
somebody with the capacity to grow into other things.
Right, and so I just, as a courtesy to you, I've not proceeded unilaterally in hiring these individuals because they are going to be supporting you. So if we are now at a place where you're comfortable and cognizant of the need for that admin hire, then I will proceed with that.
Yeah, Carol Flynn and I had a meeting at this 3 o'clock yesterday, so I wasn't able to necessarily prepare for her. And I think we went through the job descriptions and we came up with a job description. I would say, I guess I'm going to ask you to plan on that till next week, so I can give you the job description.
Then
We can discuss that.
I think so the grant manager for go.
Yeah.
Get rolling on that baby.
Yeah.
What I would like to see is a really clear package, Christine, from you and Rob about the staffing, about what they are, you don't need to have the job description, but just how they pencil out at this point relative to a budget. I think we need to get some clarity around that.
Is this description not the one we're working off of, administrative assistant?
Oh, yeah, I guess we got, no, that's changed. I'm sorry, when we reviewed that,
This was the one that Patty gave the feedback to grow into a, not somebody who just pushes paper, right?
Complex administrative work, yeah.
But, so I'm confused now,
it's generally the same.
Patty.
No, that's-
I'm confused because this administrator could support the board. There's a pile of paper, by the way, as well as systems management.
Agreed.
And then administer as in supporting our executive director, right? And what other, other duties as assigned is always my favorite phrase. But is there other expertise or clerical requirements that come to mind? Because, we're going to have very specific use people in terms of grant administration and so on. But, somebody to help coordinate with Bikuda or prepare a PowerPoint or make sure that the CUDs receive information, maybe administer the website. Those are all things I could imagine this administrator doing.
But also the capacity to be able to understand all the moving parts, to understand there's a grant manager over here, there's a grant administrator here, and understanding this big picture. It's kind of like a junior executive director, not the deputy, but there's a capacity to understand
You're
Act
differentiating.
71.
Yeah.
And also pushing buttons to put the Zoom call on.
Yeah, and so
Subject area knowledge as well.
Exactly.
you're differentiating between somebody who's like taking dictation, please do this, and somebody who's enabled to be proactive.
And thinking and processing and flagging stuff for us
I
where
think that's
needed.
really about the personal qualities of the individual. And I think that, the phrase takes initiative or enhanced capacity to understand process, always helpful. I think that this is something we should maybe get going on as well. And that the quality of our meetings will be supported in.
I just want to see Robbie's blood pressure go down.
But this discussion, I think, helps inform June. If June is going to be doing the hiring.
Well,
That's-
yes, although I do expect to involve Christina in it.
Yeah, so there's a little confusion there about exactly, are you doing hiring or?
Oh, well, to be clear, under the statute, I am technically hiring. And as I said, as a courtesy to the board, I have held off because I've wanted to have the benefit of your input. You've certainly given me some great input here. So my recommendation at this stage would be that you get on board with my going forward and hiring. And as I said, Christine, I invite you to participate in that hiring process. And I think the criteria that you described here today is well, suited to what we're trying to do. I hope we can find somebody like that. That's all. I just have to, as a word of caution, we are talking about state pay. And I'm hoping that there are individuals out there who are excited about doing the work. And, as a resume builder for somebody to work with a board of this caliber, that's a huge opportunity for somebody. But I think Holly's nailed it, that at the end of the day, the things that you're most interested in are going to be personal to the candidates. What I'm looking for today is everybody's on board with my postings opening and getting going.
All right, I'm going to put it to the board. Are we prepared to take action today before we look at the full staffing plan?
On that one, yeah.
All right, is there a motion?
Motion.
Second.
Okay, we have a second, we have a first and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries.
Excellent. I think you will come to look at this as no regrets hiring.
Yes.
So you know you need resources, you need greater clarity, but at a minimum, you need these resources.
Okay.
That takes us to the attorney discussion. So in a nutshell, as you heard from Christine a moment ago, the hiring rate for an attorney is perhaps a little more expansive than you might have previously understood. But to be frank with you, it's not as expansive as I'm accustomed to seeing in the private sector when it comes to high-powered counsel. And that, I'm afraid, is a function of state government employment. Thank you very much. I have been privileged to make my career in state government, and I would do it again just as I have done it, but it has come at a financial cost to me. And I'm well aware that I could have, as an attorney, commanded a much higher salary for my specialties in other markets, but I've not chosen to do that. And so I think that's a reality this board has to grapple with. Of course, you want top flight counsel, and I've listened to your deliberations about this, and the first thing I would say to you is I've had enormous success in my time in state government hiring attorneys of very high caliber into state government pay. So I wouldn't foreclose the possibility that I will be able to locate somebody who will be able to bring the kind of expertise to bear that you have in mind. I would also underscore that, again, I have invited Christine to participate in this hiring process because the statute says I'm to hire the person, but the statute also says that person advises you, reports to you. And so from my own attorney background, I was not comfortable proceeding without your input on that hire. So the way I see it is I am signing the paperwork for whoever ultimately gets hired, but the judgment about who to hire really belongs to your executive director. That's how I'm approaching the process. I have listened to your deliberations, and I have heard reservations expressed about whether you're looking for a staff attorney or somebody who's more trained up in advising a board. And I can say, having had both types of positions in my career, they are very different, very different skill sets and degree of subject matter expertise and the like. So I can understand why hiring a staff attorney or hiring a general counsel in the tradition of state government service may not be everything that you're looking for. And Holly, I have in mind, comments that you've made in the past. And so it seems to me that one way you might consider bridging that is to get a staff attorney who is quite capable in doing the kind of legal work that you folks need right now: contract review, contract drafting, statutory interpretation, and the like. But when it comes to advising the board, if you're looking for that skill set, you might consider whether you can retain counsel on a contract basis who is yet different from that staff attorney. And I'm guessing, I do not know, but I'm guessing that there are many public-spirited attorneys out there who have the kind of skill set that you may be envisioning for a board counsel, who will understand that this is an opportunity to do good service for the state of Vermont, not an opportunity to necessarily beef up that 401k plan. But I don't mean to be crass, that's how I would resolve, if there is an impasse among you as to how to proceed with legal counsel, that is one way I could recommend resolving it. But I do recommend at this point that I'm uncomfortable, I don't know why, consent to my proceeding with advertising for this position. But please let me have your thoughts on it.
Can I talk a little bit to this?
Absolutely.
So, June, all lawyers aren't necessarily money-grubbing 401k patters, but the fact of the matter is that attorneys with deep commercial contract experience do get paid a fair amount. And I think that I've met fabulous state attorneys in my tenure in state government.
I'm pleased to meet you.
Yeah, and you're included. And the fact of the matter is that some of them do have commercial experience, but when I was working at the Vermont Telecom Authority, there was one commercial attorney for the entire state government, one. So it isn't common experience. In the work of this board, I think we have not 2, but 3 categories of legal work. Category 1 is the daily work, getting the documents correct, making sure that we have compliance with the act, making sure that we understand what the legal requirements are for both applications and process. And some of that, frankly, is going to be taken on the shoulders of the grant administrator. Some of it because there's forms. There's a form. There are state requirements. I mean, it's not all drafting from scratch, so to speak. But a daily attorney to help answer questions, to keep you guys going is essential, and I agree with that. Occasionally, this board may have, and I think that person should also do the request for information. and public document responses. Secondly, the board itself might have governance questions or operational questions from time to time, but I don't see that as necessarily a daily do. The one question in my mind is whether, whether this board thinks that we need, on a meeting by meeting basis, a general counsel to sit in. I haven't seen it yet. To my knowledge, we haven't needed it yet, but that's a question. And whether that person would be hired on a contract basis by meeting, or is it by subject area when we have a thorny issue comes up. The third question is, to me, the most important. We have an obligation to make sure that these are sustainable systems and that they are that they meet the conditions of the Act based on how they might transfer to the state in the future, and whether or not there's complex concepts like open access architecture and that sort of thing. Those commercial contracts with the operator are being done at the CUD level, but they should be meeting standards that are legal standards that are set by the board, and whether or not they have been appropriately drafted or mitigate risk should be analyzed by somebody. So in terms of our risk mitigation criteria, I saw that the minute says that staff will ensure legal review has been completed prior to submittal. I don't even know what that sentence means. So, I think that we might want to have somebody who's kind of looking down at the network operations configuration that's created by operating agreements and says, yeah, this seems enforceable. This is an enforceable contract. It's not a situation where the CUD is being, taken to the cleaners, so to speak. It meets the requirements of Act 71. There's ways to mitigate if there's a problem that arises. I mean, I don't know. That's my thought about how we would administer, particularly once we get to the construction grant period. And, that's why when we were talking about the idea that operating agreements have to be in place in the pre-construction phase, I was saying, well, I hope they understand what the criteria should be, because I don't think it's straightforward and simple just to sit down and read the statute and make sure it's in your agreement. I think somebody needs to monitor that.
So the three buckets that I heard Holly reference are staff level attorney for day-to-day, basic legal work. If we need general counsel to attend our meetings and support us is the second bucket, and the third is commercial contract review.
Yep.
Is that accurate?
Mm-hmm. And in that
discussion.
And in that category, I think having somebody with some telecom experience is helpful so that we understand that the regulatory requirements are met and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, just pose a question though.
Sure.
So all of these operating agreements are being reviewed by attorneys that are looking at Act 71. None of the CUDs are going into this blind. So just to be clear, so you want someone else to review the work of that attorney in creating the agreement to ensure that it matches up with our vision for Act 71.
If the work is done well, it should be like that. And if the work is not done well or is done before Act 71, oh my, we might need an amendment, or we might need a discussion among the parties, or there might be grant conditions that have to be embedded in order for them to meet the objectives of Act 71.
Except that is a question, because it's like there is one operating agreement that's in place before Act 71, EC Fiber. The rest of them are all new after Act 71.
Yeah, I think we said, in our last discussion, when you talked about staff will ensure legal review, I was interpreting that to be, that we would have independent legal review. Now, we also talked about the fact that we may need to modify some, and we have notified the CUDs, we may need to modify some of these operating agreements to comply with Act 71 as part of the administration process.
Well, and you might just be able to do that vis-a-vis the grant conditions as opposed
Yeah,
to,
that's true.
Yes.
but, you know, so if you're granting to a CUD and the CUD has an agreement with an operator in place, I'm not quite sure how that, I'm thinking of I happen to know the operating agreement of EC Fiber. And there is one vehicle by which you could get the conditions of the grant used in that situation. But it's not simple, and you would have to create criteria that would make it happen. And I don't want to make mountains out of molehills, but I look at the long term here, and I'm thinking, you know, shame on us if this turns out to be the situation where, yeah, we made all kinds of grant conditions about what we're trying to deliver to the public, but their operator agreements just don't even allow us to get there.
Yeah, the 2 points. First, that with these operating agreements, not all of the funds are going to be coming from us. Ideally, they're going to be raising funds separately. So I don't necessarily think it's reviewing the operating agreement, but it's ensuring if they're going to get funds from us, they're going to meet certain conditions. So I agree that those conditions, it's not changing the operating agreement necessarily. It's more of adding conditions for accessing funding. And they can choose whether they want the funding or not. But that's
well, and if we have doubts about the operating agreement, it may be the case that we say we want to see the agreement of your vendor to these conditions.
Yeah, Holly's raising really important points here. One of the things in Act 71 is that in the event, and I'm not going to get the wording right, but in the event the CUD doesn't perform, the state takes over the assets. So if we've given a 25% off coupon on a $1 billion project, there's other monies coming that will also have obligations to those same assets. How the state is positioned to line up for that in the event of a default is super important. And that's what I think you're getting at in that commercial contract review. This is like bankruptcy stuff, which nobody wants to even think about. But if we don't set this table now for that to sugar off appropriately, the state could be last in the line, and we all look like we haven't done our job for serving the state. So I think that's exactly what you're pointing to. I completely agree. That is a big lift type of attorney work product versus staff level churning through documents. And so we've got the 3 buckets. And my thinking is, can we propose to move ahead to get the staff level attorney sooner than later? And then working with that staff level attorney, we identify this commercial contract issue is super important because we need the state to be able to be first in line in the event somebody goes south on us so that the state's assets are protected.
Yeah, we also got to know it's not just the CUDs. We always keep talking about the CUDs, but there are going to be grants given to other operators operating in areas that don't have CUDs or with the permission, that won't interfere with how it's stated in Act 71.
Everybody wants to talk about EC Fiber. EC Fiber is subject to bond covenants. It might not be possible for them to access grant money if a requirement that we're going to implement is that those facilities would revert to the state. The bondholders won't allow it. I'm not saying that they wouldn't allow it. I'm saying I don't know if they would allow it. So Patty, just to put a finer point on it, yes, we should talk to our staff attorney about it. But until we know what the qualifications of that individual are and the depth of experience in commercial matters, I think we might be well served to understand we may be supplementing our staff attorney in some complex commercial matters.
Agreed. Brian and Dan, Laura, understand that, support that, recognize, and so if we move forward with staff level attorney, that does not mean we have spent all of our legal dollars. We likely will have, I would expect we will have more legal dollars, especially that commercial contract issue is a big one.
And am I just understanding that the staff attorney is part of the Department of Public Service, June? No.
As I said, I do the paperwork, right, for hiring, but that person upon, I think either Christine's appointment or the board standing up is to transfer report to you. And that is why I have held off on that hiring, because I just couldn't figure out a good way to make that happen in these few months here knowing that attorneys have to be clear on who their clients are, who they derive their instruction from and the like. So I think the best way to interpret the statute is as I have interpreted it, which was to invite Christine to participate in this process. And I think you've been very thoughtful as a board in getting to the place where you're prepared to proceed. Because truthfully, you've broken it into 3 buckets, Holly, but the way I look at it, it really is 2 buckets. And the question is, do you want that staff attorney to have a layer of board acumen, if you will, such that we are really looking for a general counsel 1, which is what we prepared as a job description, or do you want to preserve that separateness that you're talking about, at which point I have a suggestion to make, which is that your meetings are recorded. And that is a tool that attorneys are not accustomed to having at their disposal. But I think it's quite possible that you could have a contract attorney, and if you had a governance question come up, you were saying, do we really need to have that person sitting in on our meetings? Well, if they're able to review the tape because you had something come up, that is effectively, it's not completely the same thing, but it's pretty close. The attorney is able to see how the issue came up, what the considerations were, and can then interface with you to give you counsel as you need. And so maybe that skill set of advising a board doesn't have to be in my general counsel 1 position, but the way I would proceed is to put it out there as a general counsel 1 position and see what you get. And then if there are no good candidates and Christine isn't comfortable recommending any of them to you, then we devise a plan B for this. But right now I would recommend that we get going. An element that I did not hear anybody cite that I just wanted to put out there for your consideration is part of the objective of this board is to provide centralized resources for the CUDs. And so do you envision this staff attorney position being somebody who also sort of staffs the CUD hotline, or we have this or that legal question? Can you give us at least a first push in the right direction? Just by way of example, let's say that you are a CUD and your contractors were on somebody's property and ate some wire. And you as a CUD, here you are, you don't know what to do, or it's the first time for you, and you don't have, the attorney that you hired to look at the operating agreement, whatever, is not the person who thought they were going to be assessing your CUD liabilities, blah, blah, blah. What do I do? 1-800-CALL attorney at VCBB for a starting point at least.
So I would answer you in this way. I think we should treat this person as a general counsel in as much as, yes, they can be called, and a general counsel would say, do you have counsel? Call them. And I don't think that we should be the central point. We should burden some individual with being the central point of legal services for the CUDs. I think if we're going to have the person support the staff and do the FOIA requests and do some board requested work, that then to also open them up as the public repository of legal information. However, a good general counsel would say, here are recurring legal issues that we need to address. I'm going to suggest to the board or the staff that we put out an FAQ on this and an FAQ on that, and that they'll be available for training sessions when there's, questions about insurance and stuff like that. And that's great, but I want to be a little bit careful that we not create the expectation that we're tasking an individual lawyer to have a client relationship with 9 CUDs.
But I take your point, and I don't want to devolve into weeds, and I'm also not making an argument for that. I'm bringing it forward because I know the degree to which Rob was frequently confronted with questions of law or quasi-questions when he was with us, and that always set off a 5-bell alarm as to, can the department even answer these questions for the very reasons you just said.
Yep.
And so it is, in my opinion, better for there to be at least a clear entry point to make that first cut. have you talked to your council or not?
Yeah.
Forgive me, Rob, and have that be done by somebody with a JD.
Yeah.
And that's what so I was just suggesting
Taking the
that.
word away. Yeah.
No offense taken.
I know. I am a proud lawyer. Anyway, so I would, I mean, what we're really looking for, that is Christine and I, are really looking for is somebody who's probably, if they don't have the general counsel experience, they show that they're building towards something like that, but that has the requisite acumen for, dealing with the contracting aspects to the extent that it's about the grants, Act 71, dealing with recurring issues such as compliance with public records laws and the like. Yeah, I think that's the nature of what we're looking for. And maybe we'll get lucky and we'll find you somebody who's got it all, and then still set aside but prioritized for you'll have to work that out, the commercial acumen, which I think you're speaking from experience. So, and frankly, I'm dying to ask more questions, but this isn't my time, it's your time. As to the kind of, because as soon as you said the word transferability, and that set off for me a whole chain reaction. But that's me in a past life. So
I also wanted
Laura
to
has her
tell
hand
the
up.
CUDA that they might want to consider centralizing legal resources.
Laura.
Yeah, thank you. So Holly's description, it got better for me as she went along in terms of how we're supporting CUDs. And I think actually that I can get on board with that. One suggestion that I'm hearing is that we look to an entity like VLCT, which is also an entity that is in service of municipalities, to see how that kind of interacts. But I think that at least to start, I'm comfortable with Holly's suggestion of how that would go, keeping in mind that we are always trying to work in service to these heroic Vermonters that are doing this work.
Okay, I'm going to ask the board if they're ready to call this question to say if we have a motion to authorize the Public Service Department through June and Christine to hire General Counsel 1.
So moved.
Holly?
Second.
We have a second. Any more discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
I hope, Commissioner, that you'll look for the quality in that attorney of knowing when to ask for help.
of course, I know I'll be looking for myself.
We all still working on that.
Yes. And Madam Chair, I think I am at the end of the agenda for me. I'm happy to stay to answer any questions. Otherwise, I will turn into a pumpkin.
Thank you very much.
There was
Tierney.
a question from our minutes. Pardon me.
Yes.
Whether or not the DPS can make available the annual capital plans of utilities and related GIS shape files so that CUDs can coordinate with them. This was a question about getting a leg up on electric utility planning, and somebody else would be better situated to speak to that, but I thought we might bring it up while we have the benefit of Commissioner being here.
I do recall this exchange from reviewing the tape from the last meeting. I think, Brian, your phrase was they can require the utilities to provide these plans, and the utilities have such plans, 5-year plans. So I'm certainly happy to make inquiry. On the GIS shape files, I'm out of my depth. I'm going to have to talk to folks about that. Can you give me more to go on?
Yeah, instead of require, I'd say encourage, just to make it easier. But most of the utilities will have at least a 12-month rolling distribution rebuild schedule. And there may be some coincidental benefit where electric distribution rebuilds and telecommunication builds overlap, and we should try to take advantage of that.
Yes.
And if the CUDs or their project designers had access to that, they may be able to find those coincidental overlaps and save everyone that money.
Yes, so a couple of things. One, that coincides very nicely with an offer that the Secretary of Transportation made this week to give Christine and Rob a tour of their planning dashboard that shows where projects are going. This topic is of very keen interest to the governor to make sure that where there are opportunities for efficiencies in building, if nothing else, the convenience of the public on roads and the like, that those be identified. So I'll be happy to engage on that. What is the best way for me to report back? Is that through Christine? And then Christine will exercise her judgment. Okay, very good.
And a lot of those distribution rebuild projects are actually driven by AOT. So if AOT is widening the road, you're going to move distribution. So that's another convenience synergy that might occur. So that's a great connection there.
Excellent.
And we'd be happy to take advantage of the agency transportation's offer.
Oh, excellent, because they'll be trying to get dates with you then.
Okay.
I think the two that they suggested were a little too soon, but
Right.
I've asked them to put it off a little bit, and Audrey will be reaching out to you for that.
Right.
Brian and Dan, in a past life, who would you have expected at the department to get such a call from asking for such a plan in my shop?
Probably Bill.
Bill,
Bill
okay,
Jordan,
thank you very much.
Yeah, and the shapefile is just the GIS data of where those line reconstructions are planned to be.
So that's not a separate ask, but rather it's a particular aspect of what you're asking for.
Yeah, if the DU could provide it, well, that
Not all will have it, but
Not all have
if, in the event they have
Okay,
GIS
we
data
take,
for their
what
system.
roads you're going to be on. I mean, we take whatever we got.
Okay.
Incorporate it
I
into the
understand.
telecom plan.
excellent, okay.
So Delta doesn't fall in that D bucket, but if they could include this as well, we'd be happy to provide it.
Oh, very good. Well, that's your Velcro hat. Yeah, I heard from Velcro and WEC. Yeah, not so much GMP down there. Okay,
I mean, just one question before we make that call to ask, because I'm very conscious of, being in my utility sphere and getting gobs and gobs of data requests, and it does chew up a lot of work for staff. Are we gonna be able to have capacity to deal with any, like, if that is dumped on your plate in the two of you, what are you gonna do with it?
We
It's
need our GIS expert.
Yes, that's what
It's a 10-minute add to a GIS database.
First, my
I actually
construction
have it
work
not-
plan is 200 pages.
I-
You're not gonna read
no,
that
no,
and
we
make
want it-
sense of it. is
That's
my
why we want,
concern.
that's why we want the GIS files. Because
Okay.
the construction work plans, yeah, we definitely want to read them. I have, utility GIS files in my GIS system in my previous job. That was part of our plan.
Yeah, the GIS data I get, because that's a data transfer.
Yeah, that's all you need.
Hopefully it's integratable, but the construction work plans are a whole different.
No, we're not asking for consent.
GIS is probably one of the next things we need to take care of, having that expertise in-house, in my opinion. Or available.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I want to just be sure I understood that. So construction work plans would be useful to the CUDs, right?
And it's to Brian's point of what are you planning to go to road XYZ or field XYZ in WEC's case and rebuild your line? And we have a 4-year plan. And that is a 200-page piece of work, but there's also, we're not doing some of that work because we got pulled off on other things.
So there's some judgment.
Here's
in
what
that.
you planned 4 years ago.
Yeah.
Here's where you are today,
Yeah.
and what are you planning for the future? But it's gobs and gobs of information and
It's not, and it's
reports.
subject to change, but we want
Exactly.
those who can and those who know, where are you going to be doing line rebuilds? I don't care about sub-transmission, I care about distribution mostly, I think. Tell me if you disagree.
I don't,
And I want to know, I'd like a 12-month horizon, because anything beyond that is so tentative that it's not worth spending design time on.
Yeah, and in the case of Velco, we just want your fiber plans, right? Yeah.
So are we, I just want to frame this up in a way that is actionable. So are we asking the commissioner if she would make an annual request for that? Are we making an annual request?
I would prefer the commissioner, it come from the DPS, it should be encouraged, not required, because we want to stay friendly on this, and it should be those who can, please do. Those who can't, we'll give you a pass. But if you're willing, if you're like, we shared this, when I was at GMP, we shared this with EC Fiber one year, and it took the steam out of the, make ready battles with them. And it was very constructive, it was very transparent, and it reset the relationship.
So you're treating it as a best practice?
Yeah, and if we can conform to it, great. If we can't, that's life.
So my takeaway from this conversation is that I'm going to get with Christine about framing precisely the ask. You will kindly make sure that you close loop with Brian, Dan, Patty about exactly what it is that you want from the distribution utilities, timeframe, so forth. I got all that, but I just want to make sure we nail it, Brian, precisely, because I don't want to ask for more than once.
Yeah, and only in the CUD towns, right?
Right, and then once I have from you, Christine, the query that you want, I will then go through Bill Jordan and we will get that for you and see what the response is. Does that sound like a good approach?
Yep.
Great, and we'll loop in Velcro as well. Okay.
So the ball's in my court. I'll come up with.
Well, I was going to get with you, so if you prefer to think of me as having the ball to get with you, okay, but I just.
No, I'll take it from here. You'll hear from me.
Okay, very good. With that, shall I remove myself, Madam Chair?
Thank you so much.
My
We very
pleasure.
much appreciate all of
My
your time.
pleasure.
Wisdom. Thank you.
This
Wow.
was,
Thank you for.
Yeah, thank you.
the huge dose.
Great.
Yeah.
anytime.
It is 11:20.
And we haven't approved the minutes.
I saw that, I'm like, let's get that one out. I would like to take that item and then we'll take a 5-minute break and then come back for the rest of the
Approving the
agenda.
minutes?
Yes. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
No, because I don't understand the minutes and they're rife with statements that I actually don't think are correct.
Okay.
And so what I would like to do is to talk through the minutes with Christine offline and bring them back for approval at the next
Yeah, I
meeting.
should tell you that I've never taken minutes before until here. So I have no clue what I'm doing. So this is the first time I've ever taken a minute in my career.
We could look into contracting for a service that takes the minutes, since we are a small board, we're a small staff, and that a lot of the CUDs are using a service I can't remember the name of.
Yeah.
That might be something that would be useful to look
It's
into.
pretty effective.
All right, so let's not take action on the minutes today.
Thank you.
Holly and
Yeah,
I'll take
Christine
it on if
will
that's all right with everybody.
Yeah, we can do
collaborate and
that
come back
offline.
to us
Come back.
next week.
But I just want to make clear, as you're trying to take minutes, first of all, I have no experience, and then secondly, trying to pay attention.
You can't do it if
Yeah.
you're in the meeting.
Yeah,
It's
it's
very
hard.
Trying to
hard.
participate.
Yeah.
And I would assume our general admin person would be the minute
Yes.
taker once we get that person on board. Okay. All right, we'll take a 5-minute break and come back.
Okay,
I think I generate a lot of minutes.
let me make sure that everybody, that we are all muted and offline in 1 moment here. Sorry, there's is on. Video should be,
We've already postponed
Video
the
is on.
ratification policy positions. and we're going to-
Maybe,
We are recording.
maybe we just take the one
So are
time,
we
are back.
on?
Yeah,
Right,
we're-
we're back in
we're-
session. We are looking at our agenda. We're noting that time certain we'll take public input at 11:50. We are now reviewing the agenda, things that we must accomplish today.
yeah, I think the one last thing we should talk about, and I think we're kind of chunking away at the budget, which I think is fine. You know, but the one thing we really need to talk about is the GIS position, because that's also another need.
that would fit under when we talk about the budget.
Yeah, well, yeah, except I don't think we're gonna be able to hit the whole budget.
Yeah, you're not
But why don't
ready.
we-
You guys aren't ready.
I think let's move, and I'm gonna, I'm proposing we move the affordability definition to the next week's meeting. Ratification of policy positions. So Holly sent this out, and this is excellent. So I have not had time to read it. I'm gonna be the first one to state that. In that light, let's take this up at the next board meeting.
And we can share with stakeholders in advance to get feedback.
I would ask that you not, because we as a board need to discuss our policy positions, and then we'll issue our policies and get feedback.
Okay, so we're gonna discuss them, but we're not voting to ratify them at the next meeting. Like, I think there's
Well,
important.
actually, if we, okay, I'd like to talk about this, because we're a board,
What's the process?
and we should be able to take action, and if there is feedback on our policies, we should hear it, and we can always amend them.
Yep.
But I think we need to make the policy first.
Yeah.
Well, I think it just needs to be public if we're gonna make a decision on something.
It will be
What?
public.
Well, in advance of the meeting. I think if it's a decision point on an agenda, we need to state that it's a decision point. At least that's we don't have a council. So
Actually, if we had general counsel here, that person could give us some advice, but my opinion would be that this board needs to, in fact, I believe that we're being uber public.
Yeah.
So we're sharing things that aren't final, we're sharing discussion points that are evolving. It's going to create confusion.
So my experience working on many public entities is boards take policy actions without being governed by public comment.
Yes.
In the event we've done something horribly wrong, we'll hear about it. And we'll get public comments. I'm perfectly comfortable with this group debating this as a board, taking action next week. And we will make it completely public, and we can always make amendments thereafter.
So that document is already
Yeah,
technically
you
public
should
if
know,
someone requested it.
I actually sent it out to the VCBB.
Well, I'm sorry you did, and I think we ought to be circumspect going forward.
Okay.
That we send out actions of the board, not discussion points of.
Okay, so that's a little bit of, all right, why don't we just leave, because the issue becomes, I've also been sharing the board packet ahead of time as well. So it gets into what I hear the board. So that, I guess I'm not sure. Be clear with me as a board what you want me to do here in terms of, do I not release information ahead of time?
And again, I'm wearing my public power hat, my co-op hat. Packets are completely transparent. I have no issues with sharing the packet as part of our process. There's things that we will take action on in terms of policies. We don't have to invite public comment on, like, as Holly pointed out. And again, we are coming through a growing process to figure out what we do, what we don't do and things. So, don't take anything personal.
No, I'm not. I'm just trying to get clarity because that's.
Packets, yes.
So
Yeah,
so
but
that
Laura has a
document-
question too.
So
just,
that document,
That's part of the
Oh,
packet.
I'm sorry, that document could be in a packet, but it should be proposed
Okay.
or draft at the top
Okay.
until the board's taken action on it.
All right. That's what, I'm just trying to get
Okay.
clarification. That's all.
Laura, do you have your hand up?
Want to support your position, Patty.
Okay, thank you. Okay, with that, we are,
One more question, sorry.
Okay.
So, and this gets the problem with weekly meetings as well, because you put a packet out 3 days ahead, 2 or 3 days ahead of time, and changes occur, right?
I
Because of-
agree.
So then the question becomes, we put a packet out and we get additional information prior to the meeting. Question is, do I send that out by email or do I just bring it in paper? You know, there, any addition, so we can only talk about what's in the packet. But if I learn new things between the packet release and the board meeting, what do I do with that information?
I think we talk about it in the meeting, don't we?
So I shouldn't send that out ahead of time when you bring it to the meeting.
I don't know, Patty.
I mean,
What are all your best practices?
so, you know, again, wearing my public power hat, you can, I've sent out material in advance of the meeting so board members can at least have an opportunity. Doesn't mean I've read it as a board member because there's no expectation I had time to read it, kind of thing. So you can send it out as an FYI, you know, take it up at the board meeting if we have time. If not, it moves to the next board agenda.
Thank you, sir.
And we have to make additions to the agenda. The only time we can make additions to the agenda is first thing when we approve the agenda to move forward. We can move things around. We can only make additions at the beginning.
I think there's flexibility around that. Again,
Yeah,
we can add during the process. If something came up during this discussion with
that's
June,
why it's a public meeting.
that we can add.
I'm taking this all from reading what the Secretary of State put out for what's the requirements for public meetings. Why don't I'll share that document.
Well, it's online. You can always just go.
Okay.
And in fact, you circulated it.
Did we circulate that? Okay.
So the
I'll have to
problem
reread.
that you're having, Rob, is that, you know, we're enumerating topic areas, and it's the scope of the topic area that can vary.
The scope can vary, but I don't believe we can add agenda items unless except at the beginning of the meeting. That's all. That's
Okay, rather than
I'm
getting
certainly
bogged,
not a lawyer.
rather than getting bogged down, it's obviously something I'll take a look at. Getting bogged down today on that. Let's jump to the budget for what we can get accomplished.
Thank you.
And again, my phone is set for the alarm for 11:50, and then at that point we'll break into public comment.
Yeah, so I think Rob and I want to talk about the GIS position. I think that's the critical of the position. You know, we don't need to go into the entire budget at this point, but I think in the budget, you'll see that I've allocated $150,000 for a GIS position. If you can give us the authority to move forward with that.
Is this, so my questions are, is that enough money to hire a top-notch GIS person so that we will be judged based on how we interpret the data we're given and how we analyze the DPS data? And our whole scheme of how we allocate funding and whether or not we get the job done is going to come down right to the point of the GIS data that we have. So is your best suggestion that we hire a staff person or that we have a contract with a contractor?
I kind of like the hybrid model that we took with the attorney. Just so, not just where we have somebody in-house, and if anything's more specialized, we contract that out. Because in my experience with my position, I am getting GIS questions left and right, and it's something that would be nice to have on Quick Dial or whatever it's called, Speed Dial, to be able to get those answers. And we're going to be using it when we're looking at grant applications, as we get any other data in. That's
Can you characterize the types of questions you're getting left and right?
Working with the department, we've created all different layers and put them into one interactive map that's helpful for planning. As we get new data in, we're going to need to integrate that, whether it's from the utilities or as projects are underway. We're also going to need to analyze projects that are proposed. So have that level of data as well. And maybe it can be taken out of house as contract, but it's.
No, but you just said you're getting questions left and right. I understand all that mechanics you just described. I understand and I agree with it. You said you're getting questions left and right on a weekly or daily basis.
So some of them are basic. Some of them is just broadband availability in my area. Some of them are.
And coming from CUDs, from individuals, from.
Comes from towns as well.
Yeah, across the board. Usually not individuals. Hopefully it'll stay that way. but certainly from CUDs, from RPCs, from individual towns. and wanting to layer it, as well as creating presentations as we go out and talk to various RPCs, towns, and CUDs. It's a resource that the CUDs also need access to, so it could be a shared resource to some extent. I just know that was one of the recommendations that came from the department, and who I normally works at, 'cause he knows how many GIS questions I'm asking, is that should be one of our top priorities, is to hire a GIS professional, someone who has even more experience than he does.
So let me just add to that. In my last job, I was the GIS professional. I don't plan on doing this job, but the last job running the CDs, I think it's a tool that I would have it running during board meetings, because you could ask a question around, hey, if we're thinking of running this route, how many people off it?
Yeah, there's no question there needs to be a GIS capability. Does anyone question? Okay, the question that I probably asked originally is, what's the best way to access or gain access to that capability? So nothing that I've heard so far would suggest that there's an advantage to having an in-house hire versus a contracted specialist, right? As long as they're readily available. I mean, the requirements are they're readily available. They're, obviously they're good at what they do, and they're knowledgeable in the tool set that you're going to use, and that they're available for whatever forums we need, whether it's a board meeting, a community presentation, or whatever, to run the figures and get us the outputs.
So Brian, the one thing I'm hearing that could be a question is that person, if you were outsourcing that skill set, which could be the quicker way to get it, and maybe the competency level goes up, I don't know, but are we giving access directly to the CUDs, or is it coming through the VCBB to our expert? So, please give me the route, the route that's the lowest density with the most unserved locations. We need verification of that. How do we do that?
Let me try to answer that question. That's an excellent question. I expect somebody like an NEK size CUD to have that expertise in-house.
Okay.
Now, Southern Vermont, no, so I think
But shouldn't they have it on contract?
Yeah, I don't.
This is another VCUDA, in my opinion. This is another VCUDA shared resource. But
Valuable shared resource.
yeah, and it could be a full-time contracted position in that capacity, I believe. But then there's a long-term, where does the department, VCGS, there's a long-term need for this, I think, outside of this board, but for the state to be able to assemble large amounts of data and be able to do analytics against that and get valuable information. So I'm reticent to want to have this team own that resource, but instead to encourage the department maybe to take a stronger role in the space.
Yeah, they've already said they can't. So
They can or cannot.
they can. There's legal issues about their database and confidentiality, and also their capacity. So I think that let's look at the question to whether we do this under a contract basis or a staff person, because the need is clearly there.
Yeah, nobody's disputing that.
And one other question is, we may as a board end up, and this is like a decision the board's gonna have to make, but we may have access at different times to data that's not public under an NDA to help inform our decision-making process. It may be more complicated if it's a contracting resource, perhaps. I don't know.
And the downside of a contract resource is you lose the control of the data at some point. So it resides outside the company, outside our.
Unless your
Depends what your
contracting
contract
resource is using your in-house technology, right? So my question, so if, let's say tomorrow we had an in-house hire for a GIS professional, what platform would they be using, and who controls that platform?
It would be the state platform, would be our GIS.
Okay,
It would be Esri products.
Okay, so again, the contractor could be hired to run that platform on behalf of VCBB or on behalf of, the broadband initiatives, right?
Yes.
I guess it just depends on how accessible this contractor will be, what the turnaround would be to be able to
Well, I
get
think
answers.
that's
You have a
Like
service level
that's-
agreement, right? I mean, you would contract with them at the level of service you wanted to have, and then they would charge.
Like 24-hour turnaround, right, on a request.
And maybe in the ideal cases, Vicuda could be using the same resource under the same arrangement, and now you're sharing, you have created a full-time position, which is doled out.
Dan, I'm hearing you on the Vicuda thing, and I've attended a couple of their meetings. I don't view them as, in terms of the scale of evolution, I don't view them as evolved to having those kinds of employees and resources. And the other thing that happens is we need to be able to say to whoever our resource is, inside or outside, and I do wonder about the DPS data crossing the walls and going outside, but if Vicuda were providing the data, can different CUDs ask for different kinds of parameters so that we're no longer one consistent database and applying the same standards across the board? I mean, I do worry a little bit that we all need to sing from the same sheet, so to speak, and that the GIS provider is really going to be the one that helps keep us in alignment. And so if it's over at Vicuda, I don't know how we assert that kind of control. If you think that's an important objective, speaking as the least data-driven person in the room.
What I was suggesting is if we can set some parameters out, and this is what we would arrange with this GIS professional, they could access that same professional because they're coming up to speed on this data.
I see.
And then they could time share that resource. They're already up to speed on it. Similarly, when we talk about standards, do we need to set standards, or could we encourage Vicuda to set standards? If you have a consortium, we could encourage them to come together and work more closely together, agree on standards. That organization could grow to be more valuable to each of the CUDs. I hate to pay for each of the 9 CUDs to build a wheel. And especially when
the finance issue.
Especially when EC Fiber comes with the wheel. And for the most part, they've been helpful. And I haven't seen anywhere where
their vendor has been.
Yeah. And so with the goal of getting broadband to all of these places, I'll just repeat it. I hate to pay for the same work
6 times or 9 times.
Yeah, you should know there are already state standards for GIS data. We've required that.
Yeah, and that's.
So you're saying, Christine, that the standards for the GIS data will travel with the data, whoever picks it up.
That's a requirement.
They have to conform to the GIS.
It's actually the utility set the data. I actually had this discussion in my last job. One of the utilities that wanted to make their own database said, we're not going to do it. You're going to comply with state standards. That state GIS database is well thought out.
I also think as we talk with Vicuda, maybe we should ask Vicuda what they want to become, because I don't think they've reached the consensus yet on what they want to become.
They may not be able to answer that, which is fine. That's an answer.
So what I'm hearing,
or that the other alternative is could we fund a position inside the DPS to do GIS on our behalf, right?
I got the no on that one.
Even if we funded it?
They want a clear divide.
Yeah.
So.
But we're going to be using their data,
But we may have access to additional data that they don't want access to, and vice versa.
Laura, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, so this makes some sense to me, though it is frustrating because they're regulators, and this was part of the discussion about why we needed a separate board versus outside of DPS, sort of. They are regulators, and we are supporting folks that are building, that are competitors to the people that they are regulating. So I understand why this might be, though it is frustrating. And I do agree we need to act pretty quickly. Can we contract with other, I don't know if people were talking about, can we contract with other state services?
Well, there's people in the world that do GPS.
I guess all I'm asking for, following this discussion, if we can approve the budget line item for $150,000 we'll get contract services. Now, the contract services, well, let's not define where those come from, but we're gonna go out and get the best services.
Contract services to the board. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
As long as we own the data, and if for whatever reason the contractor bags out on us,
Yep,
we
of
have the
course.
ability to
Yeah,
get
we'll put the
that.
requirements on this. Yep.
Just want that protection so that we don't have to start from scratch.
So
Yes.
do we want to quickly take action before we start public comment? I move that we authorize staff to spend up to 150,000 procuring GIS services in service to the board.
We have a second for this.
Well, stop, no. So I'm worried that what I heard you say is they can spend 150 procuring, which means they're spending 150 to gain access to services, not to actually have those services delivered.
I'll take that as a friendly amendment. So the staff is authorized to spend up to 150,000 to obtain or I'll just use the word
To deliver.
deliver GIS services to the board.
Over what period? Are we talking a year? What's the?
Yeah.
It's
I
the,
think
yeah,
a
the
year
budget
makes
period.
sense.
Yeah.
150 each year.
Yeah.
And
And
this
that doesn't
doesn't address
preclude
the
us
shared
from getting,
resources.
that doesn't preclude us from getting supplemental resources if we feel we need them, right?
Yeah, as long as that's, yeah.
This is our starting point.
150s, I mean, to get kick-ass GIS services, if you did it on a contract, that would be light.
That would be light, yeah.
If you're gonna get the people and the tech, the data collection and all that. But again, I hope we're not starting from scratch. We're gonna use what exists.
Oh, yeah. Well,
Yeah,
there's why GIS, most of it.
Okay, we have a motion on the table. Do we have a second?
Second.
Who moved it?
I did.
Did the motion contain the timeframe, 1 year?
Yes, it does say, so we authorize staff to obtain GIS service board for 1 year.
We have a second.
Moved by Holly, who second?
I'll second it.
Okay.
Is there any further discussion?
So further discussion, I'm just thinking that I think we would exhaust that in the first year because there's an enormous bubble. So I guess we would come back and approve more.
Mhm.
We don't even have to wait for the year to be up.
Oh, yeah, someone,
Yeah, this initial contract can be up to 100.
We're just getting somebody
Yeah,
started.
okay.
Any further discussion? Laura?
No.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
With that, we're going to conclude the budget item and we're going to open up to public comment, public input.
So we don't have anybody in the room today. If you're online and would like to make comment, please raise your hands and I will acknowledge you and unmute you and put you on spotlight.
And all the time.
And yes,
And
Holly,
Holly,
full
just
time.
for the record, Holly is our timer, 3 minutes per person. Thank you, Holly.
Is there any public comment? Anybody on the call? Okay, Krista is the first, and let me. Okay, Krista, I think you're still muted. There you go.
Great. Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody. I really appreciate the time and effort and the consideration and deliberation that's gone into many of the discussions. So I just wanted to provide a couple of quick comments on some of what was discussed. One is that we feel that it's really important that the CUDs do have an opportunity to comment on policies, particularly because it appears that those policies will, could and may substantially impact, hundreds of millions of dollars and how that's done. And I think that the perspective that the CUDs have from deep diving into the process of how we're going to be standing these up can be very informative to that. And so I do urge you to send those out in enough time for us to be able to provide feedback either to Christine and Rob for, that they can condense or directly to the board as you wish. And the second thing I will say is that, some CUDs have made significant progress and are poised to do significant work in order to get us to construction ready point for the spring. And that is really critical in terms of being able to access the remainder of the pre-construction grants. So while we did, receive, 200,000 roughly, that will help us create our executable project plan. And that will be done and give us the opportunity to do the design work, which we will be contracting for imminently. So I'm really focused on trying to get use of the construction season, and that means, issuing RFPs for fiber and certain types of materials. And that means contracting for the design work, which can sometimes mean a moderate amount of upfront funds. So I just urge you to take those things into consideration. And I do think we should act with deliberation without question. I think the last thing I'll say on that is that we can make some initial decisions and initial funding per CUD and reserve a portion of it if there are certain things that we want to finish deciding. In other words, we can do some of it without doing all of it and work in parallel as you're standing up the remainder of the processes. So thank you for your time.
Christine, identify who she works for.
I'm sorry.
Krista, she's NEK Broadband.
Okay.
Thank you, Krista.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm the interim executive director for NEK Broadband.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Sorry, I'm having some. Do we have any other questions? Okay, we have Chris is up next. I will spotlight you. And yes, please identify yourself and who you are.
Yeah, thanks all. Chris Recchia from ValleyNet. Thank you. I wasn't able to attend the first part of the meeting through most of Commissioner Tierney's stuff, so I will listen to the results. But I did want to just say that kind of following on Krista's point, I just want to make people aware that there's probably a 6-month lag in material delivery, and it's going to get worse, not better. And so I just think that as you transition from the pre-construction to construction, recognize if we want to actually try and use next construction season, pardon the pun, constructively, we're going to need to order materials probably before the end of the year. And I don't know how that all works. I don't have an answer for it. I just wanted to raise that as a point for you all.
May I ask Chris a question?
Yeah. Hi, Holly.
Hi, Chris. You're representing EC Fiber today?
Yeah, at the moment, yes, but ValleyNet, I'm sorry, go ahead.
And so my question to you is, it was noted earlier that EC Fiber hasn't asked for pre-construction funding to date.
Right.
Is there any, do you have an indication that EC Fiber will be asking for construction funding soon? Because we're taking this very sequentially.
I understand. So we will be applying for pre-construction based on the RFP that I understand is going to be issued tomorrow, unless that changed today before I got on. But we will be responding for pre-construction for the new towns, and then we do want to have conversations about construction funding earlier rather than later, because it does affect, and it seriously affects our bonding requirements for next year. And so it's, again, something to think about, but normally we do our bond issuance in the fall, November, December timeframe. And you know, it is very much affected by construction funding that might be available through you all. So I know that this is torturous and there's a ton of scheduling issues, but we look forward to working with you on that. But we know we're going to apply for pre-construction funding in response to the RFP tomorrow.
Chris, this is Rob. I do have a question that came up earlier in the meeting. In terms of the bond conditions that EC Fiber has, have you noted that there's any conflict between those bond conditions and the requirements of Act 71?
Not that we've noted yet, no.
You're not in a position to provide legal
Sorry to put you on the
counsel.
spot.
You're not providing legal counsel on the bond conditions, right?
Correct. I'm not.
Okay. I think that's something that I would certainly be interested in.
Yeah, and we can absolutely do that analysis. Truthfully, we have not had an opportunity to do that yet.
I mean, just to put, I know Chris's 3 minutes are up, but just to put a bow on this issue, Act 71 calls for the state having the ability to step in the event a grantee is not able to perform financially or its services. So to the extent that you are issuing bonds, the state is also going to have requirements if we're giving out grants. And we need to be able to line up those interests in order of preference. And this board would like to see the state's interest before a bond entity's interest.
Well, that's fascinating. We'll need to talk about that.
Polite for
That was polite.
Good luck with that.
Wow. Okay, that is really interesting. Obviously, we hope to make use of state grants. We've been very successful with the bonding. I'm not sure. Okay, I'm not gonna comment further because I'm not sure what the implications are on the bonding.
But that's the nut in the room that we have to crack. This by Act 71, there's requirements with the money.
Yeah, but I interpreted that as being associated with the grant money, not with any money that was out there.
Well, the grant money builds assets. In the event the assets roll out and the entity behind them is defunct, the state wants, per Act 71, the state is entitled to step in some capacity and take over those assets.
Agreed. And I don't see a problem at all with distinguishing assets that have been paid for by grant versus assets that have been paid for by bonds, if that's helpful.
Okay. That is helpful. I still think it's a hard solution.
I think so too. Yeah. And
it's as if you and I bought this phone together. How do we split it up? This
right. You take the
and
receiver.
That is yours.
You take all the incoming calls and I take all the outgoing calls.
Exactly.
Perfect.
Okay.
All right. I'm sorry I don't have an answer for that, but I appreciate the heads up on that issue.
Yes.
I'll pursue that with my folks.
Okay. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you all.
Okay. Are there any other public comments or any other public comments? I'm not seeing any other hands up.
Okay.
No one?
Going once, going twice. Public input is closed. Thank you all for listening in and your feedback. And it is 12:03. I'm going to take a motion to adjourn 2 minutes early unless there's any other business.
So moved.
Second. Nice job.
All those in favor of adjourning? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you all.
Have a good week. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
The recording is now stopped.